Hey, so right now it's November 2024, which is a very special occasion for me for a couple reasons. I don't take a lot of pleasure in saying this, but I was born November 4th, 1994, which as the math adds up, means I've just turned 30 a couple weeks ago. Yep, the big 30. My 20s are now over. This is a reality I've not been looking forward to. The existential dread of this has been looming over me for some time, thinking of all I've done and, more importantly, all I've not done leading up to this point. It scares me. 30 really doesn't have some kind of cosmic significance. The significance we've placed on each 10 is arbitrary. The effects of age don't fit neatly into how we divide things, and those effects are gradual, not sudden. I'm no different now that I'm 30 from the me 1 minute before I turned 30. I don't truly feel any different, yet it's still a scary feeling, and I can't explain why. You know what? Never mind. I should probably stop with the pseudo-philosophical crap. I'm not smart enough to say anything insightful about the passage of time. 30 isn't even that old anyways. It just kind of feels old before you reach it. Big number, scary to dumb monkey brain. But speaking of monkeys, there's another birthday that I'm much more interested in celebrating. Today is November 18th, 2024. On this day, 30 years ago, Donkey Kong Country was released in the UK. Donkey Kong Country is a very special game and series to me. I basically grew up alongside the game. By the time I was born, my sister, who is much older than me, already had an NES and a Super Nintendo, and would shortly after get an N64. So I had access to all three as soon as I was old enough to be able to play games. Donkey Kong Country probably wasn't my first game I've ever played. I don't remember what was, but I'd put money on either Mario World or Mario 64. But Donkey Kong Country is a game that I can't remember ever not having played. It's been with me my entire life, and Donkey Kong has remained one of my favorite franchises of all time. In fact, the Donkey Kong Country portion of this legacy is still my favorite game franchise ever. You thought I was the Luigi's Mansion or Paper Mario guy, huh? Yeah, Mario's cool and all. But my king of gaming is the king of the jungle. Covering the Donkey Kong franchise has been a major goal of mine from the start of my channel. I've been wondering how I wanted to approach it. Should I tackle them in release order, separate them into eras, or something else? But when I realized that Donkey Kong Country was turning 30 this year, I knew when and which game to cover. The time has come to start a new review series. I'm planning on covering most, if not the entire Donkey Kong franchise and beyond. What better place to start than the game that redefined the Big Ape and started the series that is nearest and dearest to my heart. Happy birthday, Donkey Kong Country. Man, seeing that logo and that jingle never fails to put a smile on my face. You boot the game up and are greeted by this very charming title screen of Cranky playing the old Donkey Kong arcade theme while standing on the girders iconic to the original game. But then, the modern Donkey Kong jumps in with a boombox playing a remixed version and dances away, until Cranky retaliates. This intro tells us nothing about the story of the game, but rather shows the new identity of the Donkey Kong franchise, as well as the dynamic between DK and Cranky. Before this point, Donkey Kong hardly had much of an identity. Each game was very different from the last in both gameplay and premise. First, Donkey Kong is the bad guy kidnapping the girl, and Mario has to stop him. But then Mario's the bad guy capturing and abusing DK, and now DK Jr. has to save him. Then DK's the bad guy again for some reason, and who the hell is this Stanley character? What is happening? Why are we solving math problems now? Once the Super Mario Bros. Series got going, it was obvious that they had no idea what to do with Donkey Kong. At least there was a clear vision in Donkey Kong 94. But it wouldn't be much longer after that title that Donkey Kong Country would redefine what Donkey Kong was. This intro represents the shifting of times, out with the old and in with the new. But that doesn't mean the old is going away forever. This game isn't making some deep commentary on nostalgia and being unable to move on from the past, though it certainly jabs at those kinds of people. It's just trying to have some fun. Though, that is pretty funny considering this game is far older now than the original arcade game was when Donkey Kong Country came out. Starting up a new game doesn't give you a cutscene or even a text blurb of what's going on. You're immediately catapulted out of your house and directly into gameplay. If you continue from here, you'll have zero clues as to what you're doing. You could probably make a good guess the moment you enter a boss fight, but the main piece of info you'll get is right at the start to the left. You enter this cave under DK's house. And there you go, no words spoken, but it tells you everything you need to know. DK's banana horde is missing, and these guys are implied to be responsible. I love how just simple this is, it's so effective. But if you want more details, you'll have to turn to the manual. The manual gives a full explanation of the events leading up to now. 4 pages worth. Quite a lot for a game about a gorilla looking for his bananas. I admire their dedication to the characters to try and flesh them out even when the game itself has little dialogue. It was a dark and stormy night, which is misspelled for some reason. The manual starts with Diddy Kong, who made his debut in this game. Originally, this character was a redesigned Donkey Kong Jr., but it was recommended to Rare to change him into an original character due to how different his design was. And so we now have Diddy Kong, DK's best friend, a change for the better in my opinion. Diddy is guarding over Donkey Kong's banana horde. This is part of Diddy's hero training. He has to stand guard until midnight before DK takes over. Diddy isn't too happy about the situation, but he wants to prove himself to DK. Eventually, Diddy is attacked by the Kremlings, an army of crocodiles led by King K. Rool, who've come for DK's bananas. Diddy tries fighting back but is overwhelmed and stuffed into a barrel before being tossed into the jungle. The Kremlings then steal all of the bananas and disappear into the night. The next morning, Donkey Kong is woken up by Cranky, who seems a little amused by the situation and shows him the empty cave. Full of conviction and tired of Cranky berating him, Donkey Kong storms off to save Diddy and get his banana horde back. This intro is neat, but honestly, I kinda prefer the story without it. It does have some characterization for DK, Diddy, and Cranky, which is nice, but there are some aspects I don't care for. The meta content is a little jarring. All this talk of Diddy wanting to be a video game hero and DK acknowledging that he's in a video game. I'll have more to say about the meta humor when I talk about Cranky, since meta writing is a big part of his characterization, and I think it works with him. But I don't like it when it's extended beyond him. As I'll go over more later, the style of Donkey Kong Country is very grounded and naturalistic, as opposed to, say, Mario's more abstract and wacky style. So having characters talk and act like they know they are in a video game just kind of conflicts with that style. I don't know, it's not a big deal. There's not a lot of it anyways. Also, the narration makes it sound like they already knew about the Kremlings. I always like to imagine this is the first time DK and the Kremlings interacted, that King K. Rool saw DK Isle and just wanted to conquer it then and there. The implication that the Kremlings steal the bananas because they covet them, I never liked the idea that they do this because they like bananas. The reason for the Kremlin stealing the banana horde is never really explained, and there's conflicting answers given by the devs as to what it is, even in the same post. The one I like the most is that K. Rool stole the bananas to starve the Kong so he can occupy DK's treehouse. Now, the occupying the treehouse part is a little weird. Why would a king want that? I see it as more of a symbolic gesture. Him taking DK's house is a symbol of his successful conquest of DK Isle. That's his goal, to take over DK Isle. This is all super nitpicky, I know. You might think, who cares about such small things in this dumb game about monkeys collecting bananas? Well, I care, damn it! This is my game about monkeys riding frogs and beating up beavers for their potassium fix, and I'll take it as seriously as I damn well please. Sorry, did you want a normal review of Donkey Kong Country? There are a million other ones you could watch. You came here for my take, and I'll talk about my headcanons and fan theories all I want. But yeah, I like how the story is presented in the game over the manual. It's simple and effective, and leaves a lot to your imagination. And that's the beauty of these kinds of games with simplified narratives. You are free to make your own story, come up with your own interpretations. Don't let that asshole in your ear tell you it's cringe to think deeply about simple games. Anyways, that's just the intro. But there's basically no story past it. DK saves Diddy like 5 feet away from his house, and the two of them travel across DK Isle, beating all the Kremlings and wildlife that's aligned with them to reclaim the stolen bananas, eventually beating K. Rool himself and restoring the horde. Very minimal story, but there is still more to talk about in regard to the context of the adventure, like the characters. Donkey Kong himself is obviously the main protagonist here. There's not a lot to him. He's a laid-back, chill guy. But he's ready to spring into action to protect his family and bananas, even if he'd rather lay in bed all day. Now, while he did talk in the manual, and we get a glimpse of his personality there, he doesn't talk at all in-game, and then the same applies to Diddy. So it's the intro and his actions in the game that we have to work with. And there's really not much else to say. It's interesting how the manual portrays Diddy as the hero in training, kind of implying that DK has already proven himself, even though this would be his first adventure. Unsure what could have happened here, but Diddy already looks up to him, and he seems to be the ruler of the island already. DK's status as leader of DK Isle isn't really ever said, but is to be implied, just given what the island looks like and its name. Diddy is the more interesting protagonist, and he's my favorite Kong, although a lot of that is due to the next game. But even here, I think he's the bigger star. Like I said, DK seems to have already established himself. He's the big main man everyone already loves. He's the one with the island named and shaped after him. And Diddy looks up to DK. He wants to be just like him, and is training to do so. The manual describes him as a Donkey Kong wannabe. In a way, this game is about Diddy earning his stripes, but I guess more so as a sidekick to DK rather than a full-on hero himself. He accompanies DK on his adventure and is a tremendous help, but DK is ultimately the one to set things right, and is leading the charge. DK gets the credit for beating K. Rool this time, but Diddy still is quite accomplished given how inexperienced he is, and that inexperience is what makes him more interesting. I like to think this is Diddy's first time exploring DK Isle outside of Congo Jungle. He was likely going to embark on a journey across the island at some point for his training, maybe with DK showing him around. DK himself has likely explored most of the island before, probably alongside Cranky, like how Diddy is experiencing the island with DK, or maybe even with Junior before he left to get milk. But now Diddy managed to embark on his journey with DK, and travel to parts DK himself hasn't visited while fighting off the Kremlins. I'd say that's pretty impressive. Diddy will get his proper time in the spotlight, but even here, Diddy is a star character. Cranky Kong is DK's grandfather, and heavily implied to be the original Donkey Kong from the arcade games. This also implies that Donkey Kong Jr. is DK's father, but he's nowhere to be seen. Cranky mainly exists as a caricature of people who can't let go of the past for the devs to make fun of, basically. He's the old fart who's constantly talking about back in his day and scolding younger people for having it easier than him. This is where the meta elements come in. Cranky is constantly talking about the world like it's a game, and how he doesn't like the advanced technology. He complains about how they have more frames than his own games, or more detailed visuals, or more than a few screens and actual scrolling, and boasts how the games he was a part of were much harder than today's games, and that he would have no trouble with this game, even declaring he'd be able to 100% the game in less than an hour, with one life. As I said, I'm not a big fan of the meta elements in the story itself, as it kind of goes against the spirit of Donkey Kong Country being a more grounded and naturalistic styled game compared to something like Mario. But I don't mind Cranky being the meta character, as long as the meta elements are contained exclusively to him. In a sense, he is what ties this new direction of the series to the arcade game, and he's a representation of being stuck in your ways and resisting change. The opening title screen shows us off really well, as I've already covered, and his dialogue is pretty funny, but I think that's where it should end. And as he's presented in the game itself, I'm fine with it, and do quite enjoy Cranky as a character. Funky Kong is hardly a defined character in this game. He's a cool surfer dude who runs a flight service, and there's nothing else really there. Even though he has the same build as DK and could probably help more, he's way too chill to go on adventures. And while I'm able to come up with things to say about the other Kongs, I really got nothing with Funky. He doesn't have much dialogue. He's a cool character, but there's nothing else to him other than just being a surfer dude. I suppose that's better than Candy. Candy Kong is DK's girlfriend, and that's all she is. Honestly, Candy is my least favorite Kong in the series. She doesn't really serve any purpose or add anything, even when factoring in subsequent appearances. She's the NPC assigned to the save points, and she doesn't offer any interesting dialogue while you're there. She's flirtatious and sure does talk about saving. She's the only female character, so of course her personality is exclusively that. She's Donkey Kong's girlfriend. That's who she is. She has nothing beyond that. She's defined by her relationship with DK. Yes, Diddy is defined by his relationship with DK, but there's more to Diddy than just that he's DK's friend. For one, he's a playable character, so his actions are a big part of it, but he also looks up to DK and wants to be more like him. Cranky isn't just DK's grandfather. He's this crotchety old fart who can't let go of the past. Funky is about as shallow as Candy, but at least he has the whole surfer dude personality and runs his own flight business. I just think it's a bit problematic when the only female character only exists to be the main character's girlfriend and has no personality beyond that. I know this game came out in 1994, 30 years ago, but I still think this kind of stuff is still worth critiquing. And Rare did improve with this in future games, as I'll point out when I get to them. The Kongs aren't the only faces though. there's the animal buddies, Ramby the rhino, Espresso the ostrich, Engard the swordfish, Winky the frog, and Squawks the parrot. These guys all help you out in many levels, but there's really no information on them. It's also not really known if they're as intelligent as the Kongs, or if they are like regular animals. Squawks in later games is able to talk, but here, not really clear on that. And because of this, there's not much that can really be said about them. They're not really even characters in that sense. The only thing really to say is how they contrast to the enemies. The enemies are organized in a couple groups. The enemy roll call at the end separates the Kremlings from the other bad guys. These other enemies are inferred to be residents of DK Isle that joined with the Kremlings when they invaded. This would cause a power struggle between the Kongs who rule over the island and the other residents. Perhaps the others didn't like that the Kongs were in charge and took the opportunity, or maybe they were tricked by the Kremlings. The bosses are mostly just bigger versions of the regular enemies, and at least 4 of them are definitely from DK Isle. The Big Naughties and Master Neki Jr. and Sr. There's also Queen Bee and the Zingers, but I have my own theory about them not originating from DK Isle that's best saved for the sequel. And then there's Dum Drum, who came here with the Kremlings. The animal buddies seemingly have a good enough relationship with the Kong, so they didn't join with the resisting residents. So that at least says something about the bonds they have, and that adds an interesting dynamic to the population of DK Isle. The Kremlings themselves don't have a lot going on outside of K. Rool. The manual kinda presents them like they're story characters, but they're just different types of Kremlings rather than individuals. Critter isn't a single Kremling, nor is Clump or Krusha. Their influence on the other residents of DK Isle is more interesting to talk about than the Kremlings themselves. I do really like the Kremlings, but that more so comes from their designs, which I'll talk about later. They are just the henchmen of K. Rool himself. King K. Rool is one of my favorite video game villains of all time, but not because of this game. I like him here. His design is great. I'll go over that when talking about character design, but there's just not enough of him here. Cranky doesn't talk about him. He's not mentioned in the story blurb in the manual. He's barely even mentioned in the manual. He gets a very short description along with the other Kongs that doesn't say anything more than he's their leader. He's even silhouetted so you don't even know what he looks like before you fight him. The only presence he has is his boss fight. There is merit to keeping the villain a mystery, but it's less that there's this mystery surrounding him and more he's just not there. There is one detail that does, in a way, build up to his arrival, but I'll talk about it later. And it's easy to miss anyway, so most people won't even notice it. It is because of future games that I love K. Rool so much, and still am able to appreciate his humble start in this game, but the best aspects of him are better suited for later. There still is more that can be extrapolated about him from just this game, but that requires talking more about the setting of this game, so let's do that. Did I say there's essentially no story earlier? Just kidding, because this game actually does tell a more significant story through DK Isle itself and the gameplay. The island is the story of Donkey Kong Country. It's the journey across DK Isle, leaving home and exploring the diverse biomes of the island, seeing the sights, discovering the history of the island, and what the Kremlings are doing here. Hold on, because we're going into some deep fan theorization and headcanon. I will preface that most of what I'm going to talk about are my own interpretations of the story. Congo Jungle is the first area on the island. DK's treehouse is here, along with his banana horde. The warm jungles are familiar and cozy to the Kongs. They're all in their element here. The Kongs live simple, carefree lives in Congo Jungle. But when you leave home, you end up in Monkey Mines. Old abandoned mines and ruined ancient temples are all that's here, starting to go into the unknown, or possibly forbidden territory. It's here where DK Isle starts to feel bigger, and like an actual place. Because while the island is in the shape of Donkey Kong, he doesn't command all parts of it. Even beyond the Kremlings, this island is home to others, or at least used to be. Unsure what was being dug up in the numerous mines across the island, but they're all abandoned. The Kongs don't use them. They all live in simple wooden structures. This hints at an older civilization that's no longer here, and the main clue as to who they might be is found in these ancient ruins. There are a couple temples on the island, long abandoned and in decay. Not a whole lot can be discerned about their purpose from what we can see, but there's one curious detail about them. At the top of all the columns are Kremling faces. This isn't some small, thoughtless detail. In the GBA version, there's a lot more detail in the ruins on the maps, and they have even more Kremling imagery. It's strange that these ruins have Kremlings on them. Some fans theorize that DK Isle was once home to the Kremlings, or at least have been previously occupied by them. This would imply the mines were also run by the Kremlings when they were here. Perhaps they came here to gather resources long ago, and for whatever reason, abandoned it. And it could be that K. Rool is here now to reclaim ancient Kremling territory. K. Rool could have learned of this ancient Kremlin colony and that it was abandoned and wanted to see it for himself. But upon seeing Donkey Kong's face on it, he turned to conquest. No mangy monkey can lay claim to Kremlin territory, and as the current king of the Kremlins, he shall take it back. I really like this theory, as it adds a more interesting motivation to K. Rool and why he'd want to take over DKL other than just because he's evil. I mean, regardless, it is just because he's evil, but a bit more of a reason for it is welcome. Now, moving beyond the mines, there's Vine Valley. Now we're in someone else's territory. It's close to home, but not quite. It's just different enough. There are vast forests and high treetop villages. The manual says these villages are deserted, interestingly. Maybe these also belong to the Kremlins? I doubt that, as it doesn't fit their aesthetic, though they could have been driven out by the initial Kremlin occupation. There's another ancient Kremlin temple in the area, so we know they did come out to this area even if they didn't mine here. These would fit in with the Kong style. Maybe this is where the Kongs used to reside long ago before moving to Congo Jungle. There is one bit of jungle here as well, and interestingly, this is where Mankey Kong is first seen. He could have gone here after being rejected by the other Kongs, and as the Kremlins invaded, investigating their ruins in this area, Mankey then joined them. But anyways, Vine Valley is the middle point of the journey. We're still in familiar enough territory, more like a close neighborhood. I think this is probably the farthest DK himself has traveled before, because next is Gorilla Glacier. The peak of the mountain so high up it's covered in snow. Even the manual says this place is rarely climbed due to its harsh conditions. Though there is also a treetop village up here as well, similarly deserted, although unsure what the cause could be since, even with the intense weather, this place still seems very livable. This is when the journey starts getting treacherous, in a new, mostly unknown and hostile environment, though not without its beauty. And this leads to a shocking revelation. Krem Krok Industries Incorporated is found after traversing the mountain. This isn't some ancient ruins or abandoned mines. The Kremlins quickly started building their factories on top of DK's brow after invading DK Isle. Another symbol of K. Rool's conquest. Who knows what is being produced in these factories, but we know it's causing pollution, reducing the local pond to mere poison and the surrounding area a barren wasteland. We gain a lot of insight into the Kremlins through these factories. One is obviously their lack of regard for the environment. Whatever they want, they'll take at the expense of anyone else. The manual also describes these factories as not up to code, and looking at them, they're clearly not very safe, with one of them having severe electrical problems. So the Kremlins also disregard their own safety for the sake of industry. The Kremlins have only been here for a short while, but in that time they've already left a scar atop DK Isle, and you know this isn't where it will end. Now, it isn't just about getting your bananas back, it's about saving the island itself. And that's even more motivation to take on K. Rool, and we're still not finished. Chimp Caverns is weirdly placed in this adventure, as you'd think that the factories and the pollution they cause would be the end point of this progression. But instead, it's more mines. It could be a calm before the storm. You've seen the damage that the Kremlins have done to the island, but before you can go after K. Rool himself, you have a more quiet place to ruminate on what you've just seen, to prepare yourself for the final encounter. But if we take the theory that the Kremlins have previously occupied this island and these mines belong to them, we can instead take this as showing the full extent of what the Kremlins have in store for this island. The factories show the surface damage, but the mines show that the damage they've done to this island runs deep. It's a revelation of what they will continue to do. They will pollute the surface and bleed the island dry of its resources. K. Rool wants total domination of DK Isle, with seeming disregard of the ancient Kremlin ruins. I doubt he has that much reverence for the ruins as much as he just wants the island for himself, simply because it belonged to his people before. And now it's time to take the fight to K. Rool himself. But as it turns out, K. Rool isn't even on the island yet. He's out to sea on his ship, the Gangplank Galleon. One really cool detail that is easy to miss is that at the start, his ship is nowhere to be seen, but after beating the first world, it appears off in the distance, and for every other world beaten, it gets closer. He's noticed your progress, and he's coming to finish the job. This isn't a full world, just one boss fight, but it is a bit weird. The Kremlins are mostly shown to be very militaristic and industrial, yet their king comes to shore in a wooden pirate ship. This does tie into the sequel, but for this game it's very strange and not really fitting what the Kremlins have been shown to be about. If it was a metal, gas-powered ship, it would make a lot more sense. It would fit in with the industrial nature of the Gremlins and bring home the environmentalism theming even more. Now, did Rare plan all this from the start? Probably not. It seems they were just making stuff up as they went along a lot of the time, especially with this pirate ship in the end. But obviously, they didn't put zero thought into these choices. They probably had some idea as to why the ruins have Kremlin faces on them, even if it doesn't completely match my conclusion. But regardless, it doesn't matter because they left all these gaps. And that allows me and anyone else to come up with our own ideas. And that's the beauty of games like this that feature simple stories. And don't you think that coming up with theories and headcanon explanations for this stuff made for a more interesting video? Did you want yet another review of this game to say the same basic plot synopsis of your bananas were taken, go get them, that everyone else does? I'd hope you didn't come to a video about Donkey Kong Country that's this long and expect just the surface to be scratched. Especially if you're familiar with my channel. I made a queer reading of Paper Mario Color Splash. Who do you take me for? A game as special to me as Donkey Kong Country deserves special treatment. Now let's talk about those visuals, and man is this game a looker. The Super Nintendo is when I think games really started to look good. There were some nice looking games on consoles generations prior, but the amount of detail you could get out of the 4th generation really elevated the way games look. While I prefer my pixel art to be even higher quality than 16-bit, there were some fantastic looking games on the system. But then there's Donkey Kong Country, a game with graphics so unbelievably detailed people mistook it for a Nintendo 64 game. Even Cranky references that. They looked 3D, and while Star Fox used actual polygons, it couldn't have real detail to go with the visuals in that game. We should all know at least the basics of Donkey Kong Country's graphics. They were 3D models made and then turned into pre-rendered 2D sprites. This wasn't a new technique. Rare previously did this with Killer Instinct, and even other games would do something similar, like Mortal Kombat using live actors and Doom using physical models. I'm not going to go further on the technical aspect of how the graphics were made, as I'm more interested in the final product. Pre-rendered graphics weren't a new thing, but Donkey Kong Country used this technology to create one of the most detailed and impressive looking worlds on the Super Nintendo. Rare used this technology to create a game with a huge emphasis on atmosphere, with naturalistic environments that feel almost like real places. Donkey Kong Country has a big emphasis on naturalism, which makes sense given the environmentalism theming present. While the game is obviously divided into levels that were constructed to be platformed through, they managed to make them feel more real with the sheer detail of the visuals and how the levels are laid out. In Mario, you'll just have floating platforms everywhere. But in Donkey Kong Country, the platforms are mostly naturally laid out. There's usually a visual indication as to why the platform is there. These moving platforms are on a visible track, same with these elevators. Now okay, the game isn't perfect with this, and the sequels do a much better job at this than this game. You do have some floating platforms like these arrow platforms or floating tires, walkways that look like they're being held up, but upon further inspection they don't go all the way up. And sometimes, though rarely, floating bits of the ground. These are particularly weird considering future games. Barrel cannons also float, but those are ones I much more accept because of their gameplay function. Some of this is due to limitations, like you could try to make assets and animations to have these arrow platforms look held up but then break when you walk on them, but I don't think that was something they could do. The game is very limited with animations. Only characters can really animate. Environment objects can't, really. Barrels can roll and rotate, but that's about the extent of it. Anyways, it is flawed in execution, but for the most part, the game does follow this naturalism. They went to great lengths to make this world feel real. There's also some pretty impressive parallax scrolling with a lot of the background and foreground layers. Sometimes foreground elements can get in the way and they cover the UI, but it's rarely an issue. This all gives the world so much depth to it, a very rich sense of atmosphere and immersion. This is one of the most atmospheric and immersive games of the time. I struggle to think of any competition, and it couldn't have been done without this tech. One thing the technology allowed Rare to do is use those 3D models to promote the game. Instead of having artwork drawn to convey the mood and style of the game, they could just show what they've made before they were turned into sprites. 3D graphics were getting popular, and about to be the norm, so being able to advertise your game with the actual 3D models used to make the graphics was a no-brainer. And it's funny to think that these were truer to the actual graphics than the 3D renders used to promote actual N64 games. Mario didn't look like this in-game, but Donkey Kong sure did look like this. I love old 3D renders for games back then. There's so much charm to them, and I think Rare simply had the best ones. I love how these convey convey actual scenes in the game, and they're so detailed to boot. You have DK and Diddy swinging across the jungle, being attacked by a Nekian gorilla glacier, or swimming through the ocean. Some of these can be pretty moody, like the ones in the mines. Some even show the various environments without any of the characters around. I love this one of Cranky scolding DK and Diddy, but they have their fingers in their ears trying to ignore him. It's so charming and is my favorite render from this game. But then we have that iconic box art render. DK running ahead with that dumb smile holding on to some bananas while Diddy follows on Rambi, barely holding on, and they're surrounded by a ton of enemies. DK having the time of his life, confident none of these bozos stand a chance against him, and Diddy wanting to be like DK and following along, but his inexperience showing. I love these scenes because they do an excellent job showing what the game is like and conveying its sense of adventure, as well as its atmosphere. There's also plenty of renders of just the characters, mostly just to show off the models. These still convey a lot of personality by themselves in how they're posed. I love this one of K-Rool. I don't know why he's doing that, but it's just so funny to me. Like, oh, did I steal your bananas? Also, this one of DK just staring into your soul will never not be funny. And then there's this one of his ass. Like, why is this a promotional render? The official player's guide had this render of DK on the front, and on the back, it's his ass. Yes, they actually did this. You're reading about how the guide will help you get your bananas back on DK's cheeks. That's just great. I will say that the character models themselves are a little rough. The Kongs don't really have fur, just a brown felt of some kind. It looks really weird when it reaches their hands, and the way joints are connected is weird. The textures can also make them look a bit like plastic, and in general they very much do look of their time. The characters look better in-game than in the renders, generally, but I still think there's a lot of charm to these. Getting into the actual character designs, I love the designs for both DK and Diddy especially. Their designs complement their personalities. DK being confident and in charge. He's big and muscular, and Diddy being small and scrappy, but still trying to appear tough. They've got this cool edge to them, while also being pretty chill and friendly. Diddy in particular has that fun combination of cool and cute. I like my cartoon platforming mascots to be both adorable and badass. And of course I like the red coloring of their clothes. This actually isn't the debut of DK's tie though. Earlier that same year, Donkey Kong 94 had classic DK with the tie. Although weirdly, this DK doesn't have his initials on his tie yet. In this game, it's just a red tie. I thought that he had it in the renders, but not in-game, but upon further inspection, none of the renders have it. Diddy also lacks the stars on his shirt, as these are details that came later. But yeah, good character design can go a long way to making a character more fun to play as, and the Kongs just click for me. I do prefer the bigger and bulkier design for DK from later games, but I still like this version. Diddy though, he's always perfect. 10 out of 10 design, no notes. Interestingly, Diddy is the only actual monkey of any of the Kongs, both here and for the rest of the series. He's the only one who has a tail. The rest are apes of various sorts. Kong, while used as a last name for all the Kongs, doesn't indicate a blood relation. I mean, while most of them are gorillas, in fact, all of them in this game besides Diddy and Mankey are gorillas, there are other types of apes such as chimps and orangutans. Kong just seems to be a universal designation for ape. And this does seem to include monkeys as well, given Diddy is one of them. It also doesn't just indicate the specific apes in DK's group, as Mankey, who is a Kong reject, is still a Kong. And there are other enemy Kongs in future games. But yeah, Diddy clearly has no blood relation to any of the other Kongs, and that brings some questions on how he came to know DK and the others. There is a lot of speculation I could bring about where he came from. Maybe the monkeys were the ones who lived in the treetop villages before being driven out, and Diddy is all that remains. He probably wasn't born when that happened, so maybe his parents left him with the gorillas to save him, or something. But at this point, I'm pulling this entirely out of my ass without any other clues or hints to support this. Again, it's fun to speculate about stuff like this. Last note on DK and Diddy, these two are pretty expressive. Animations are limited as I said, and while characters do animate, DK and Diddy are the ones that get the most. Most other characters have very few animations outside their walk cycles. The ones that do can be expressive too, especially K-Rool. But DK and Diddy steal the show in that regard. The intro shows this off very well. I love how his eyes pop out of his head. That even happens when you get way too close to a ledge. When it comes to nearly falling off a ledge animations in games, this is probably my favorite. There's also how both of them react to winning or losing bonuses. DK's dance is great, and Diddy throwing his hat on the ground and jumping on it when he loses is funny. I also like how they have a unique animation for when tagging each other in, and it really shows just how good friends they are. And of course, at the end, when they play pranks on each other. Although DK might be taking it a bit far here. Not too much to say about the other Kongs. They're all simple archetypes, so their designs fit them. Cranky looks like what you'd expect a crotchety old gorilla to look like. Even comes with a cane, used to beat the youngins more often than to actually walk with, and he spends all this time in that rocking chair.
Blah, blah, blah. I'm not getting out of this chair.
Weirdly, Funky just uses the same base model as DK, but dressed as a surfer dude. Also, his teeth are always out, which at this point is distinctive because this version of DK didn't have his teeth showing, though that's a bit of an uncomfortable conversation I'm not willing to have right now. Candy's design is odd. She's the only one who is more human-like in her proportions instead of gorilla-like. It makes her stand out when lined up next to everyone else. To add to what I was saying about her character, this is another reason I don't care for her. Why does she look like this? I guess fan service is the reason, but maybe I'm too gay to get the appeal here. Again, it's a bit problematic when you have a game full of apes and monkeys who are all proportioned as such, but then the one female character looks like this. Just beyond that aspect, it's less interesting of a design, and it clashes with everyone else. The Kremlings have great designs as well. They have this perfect blend of goofy cartoon villains with an actual threat and menace to them. Like, looking at these guys tells you they're dangerous and they take pleasure in being bad. And K. Rool himself has such a cool and iconic design. Not sure why he has a golden belly, but it adds to the king getup and shows more of what he's like. He's a king who rules to serve himself and his desires. He adorns himself in gold and regal attire to show his status. There's a bit of a mismatch of his design with the rest of the Kremlings, though. He's dressed like a medieval king, yet the Kremlings dress more modern military with army helmets and camo patterns. Not to mention their focus on industrialism with their factories. And then the pirate ship he rides on is another mishmash of ideas. It is odd the way this game handles the Kremling aesthetics, but there is something there. K. Rool dresses like a king as a show of status. Not because he's some medieval king. His Kremlings dress militaristically as a show of power, that this is a serious army that's invading. The pirate ship, that reveals what K. Rool and the Kremlings as a whole really are. Just filthy pirates looking to take everything they can. That idea will be expanded on in the sequel, and really this reading on this cacophony of aesthetics relies on the sequel to make sense here. While it's weird now, in retrospect, it actually works even more than it originally did. It's not as if K. Rool isn't the ruler of the Kremlings, but he's obsessed with his image and wants to appear more grand and impressive than he actually is. It's a facade to hide his true nature. He hasn't earned his status. He's stolen it, like the pirate he is. I really do miss game manuals. I get why they don't exist anymore. There's no need to read them, as everything you need to learn from them is now fully in the games. Controls, mechanics, the story itself are all contained within games themselves now, so it's kind of a waste to even make them. But there was just something special about looking through them and learning about the enemies, or getting an expanded story and looking at the artwork. And Donkey Kong Country's manual is pretty great. You get a lot of details, and there's so much personality with the art and the 3D renders. Plus, it's all in color. At the end, there's a page all about how they use Silicon Graphics computers to make the graphics of the game. The best part of the manual is Cranky Kong himself constantly appears to complain about it. Look at the fancy box. Look at the size of this instruction manual. You don't think they would have gone through all this trouble if the game was any good, do you? At the end of the story summary, he's like, "You're only reading this because you're bored." He complains about the locations being bad and that he only found 2. He complains about the controls and that they shouldn't need to be explained. He calls you out for still reading this, and just denies that there are any bonuses or even enemies. Even on the copyright page, he's like, "Copy? Who'd want to copy this game?" And he gives you some advice at the end, but not before complaining about how game players today are all spoiled. Tired of me? You're lucky I'm here to brighten up this boring manual. Even on the notes page, he's like, "Does anyone ever actually use these memo pages? Waste of paper if you ask me." You know, that's a good point. Cranky gets more character in this manual than the actual game. Man, there's so much personality and charm to this manual. It's honestly one of the best game manuals I've seen. DK Isle is such a cool setting. This massive tropical island paradise with a mountain so tall the top is covered in snow, which has also been sculpted into Donkey Kong's face so you know who the king of this place is. This image is so striking and iconic. DK Isle is made up of a bunch of different biomes, from jungles and forests to temple ruins and factories. Each area is very distinct, and while some may be a bit typical, like the snow levels or water levels, I think the amount of detail and realism in how they're portrayed makes them stand apart from, say, Mario's versions of these same themes. The actual graphical assets are still tiled though, so like how you'll see the same bricks repeated in a Mario game, the assets here will repeat in the same vein. This does mean that levels will blend in with each other visually, like which temple level is this. You'd only really be able to tell if you memorize the actual level design. You don't have any unique visual assets to distinguish the different levels from the same theme. Well, mostly. Some levels do have different color palettes, like the 2 treetop levels, and all of the water levels. The jungle levels also have some distinction with time of day. The first one is mostly set during the day, but then near the end, the level the sun sets, and now it's night. And that leads into the next level, which is set during the night, and it's raining. The final jungle level is set entirely during sunset, which is just a beautiful sight. Also, one of the snow levels starts out with clear skies, but as you progress, a blizzard slowly rolls in until it covers the whole screen. And then the next one is the opposite, starting with the blizzard and clearing up as you go along. And some levels are affected by the lighting, which sometimes has a mechanical purpose, or is just cosmetic like the fog in this level. They do add a visual element that distinguishes them visually from the rest. And while they could have done better at distinguishing levels of the same theme, I think they did enough to where it's not really a problem. The devs mix up the themes frequently, so it doesn't matter that much that some levels blend in with each other when there's a bunch of other levels that look completely different. Except for one big exception to this. There's a bit of a variety issue with the level themes. When you think of Donkey Kong Country, you'd probably think of vast green jungles. But I think of caves. There are so many levels that take place in caves or mines. Of all the level themes, 3 of them are in dark caves or mines. You've got the normal caves and 2 separate kinds of mines. One on hanging walkways, and another more on ground level. The atmosphere of these level themes is as impeccable as the rest of the game, especially when they play with mist or darkness. But there are so many levels set in caves, much more than any other level type. There are 33 levels not counting boss levels. Of those, 14 of them are caves and mines. 15 if you also count Slip Slide Ride, but I tend to not to. That is nearly half of all levels in the game. To contrast, there are only 4 jungle levels in this game. Jungles, the thing you'd associate Donkey Kong with. There are at least 10 more caves and mines than jungles. Each area has a variety of level themes, not exclusively the main one of the area. Congo Jungle mainly has jungle levels, but not exclusively. There's also an underwater level, and a cave one too. Vine Valley has forest levels, a treetop level, a jungle level, a water level, and a temple level. But then we have Monkey Mines and Chimp Caverns. 2 entire areas themed around caves and mines. Monkey Mines does have a temple level, but the rest are all caves and mines. And Chimp Caverns are entirely caves and mines. Actually, Creme Croc Industries is also kind of a cave themed for a lot of the levels. It's supposed to be the factory world, but only 2 of its 6 levels are factories. And there's 1 water level. The rest are all, you guessed it, caves and mines. So we basically have 2.5 worlds of caves, and caves can appear in the others. Both Congo Jungle and Gorilla Glacier have 1 cave level in them. It really feels like caves were a filler level type that they threw in wherever they needed more levels. Vine Valley is the only area in the game without a single cave or mine in it, and it's better for it. Honestly, the cave problem doesn't really become an issue until Creme Croc Industries. There still are a lot before then, 6 of them is still more than any other level theme, but starting at Creme Croc, you just see the variety go down hard. By the time you get to Creme Croc Industries, you've seen all but the factory theme, which again only has 2 levels in this world, and the final world has no new themes. So by the end of the game, you really start feeling the lack of variety. Alright, these cave and mine themes are technically 3 separate themes. So being the most charitable, there are 5 caves, 5 hanging walkway mines, and 4 grounded mine shafts. If we separate them like this, they still outnumber the other themes. 4 is the highest any other theme gets with the jungles and water levels. But the temple, forest, treetop village, snow, and factory levels only get 2. And then there's the single ice cave, which yes is technically a cave, but it's visually distinct enough to separate it. Seriously, why is there only 1 of these? They have another normal cave level in Gorilla Glacier. Why not make that one an ice cave? Even if you split the caves and mines up like this, they still have more than the other themes, or equal to the second highest amount. But even being this charitable, the issue here isn't with caves or mines, which is why the ice cave theme is separate from them. It's visual variety. The 3 cave and mine themes are all very similar looking. That's the issue. So much of this game is brown looking. Some levels will have a different palette, like this cave is purple, or this one is green, and some of the mines have other stuff like mist or red and green lighting, or just dark. But most of them are the regular versions of them. Even without Chimp Caverns, there's a variety issue. So it's kind of baffling that this area exists in its current form. I get it. This world is likely the result of running out of time and being unable to make a whole new level theme for the final world, so they used assets they already had. But of all the level themes they could have chosen for this purpose, why caves? Maybe they thought it fit the most thematically and atmospherically as a calm before the storm prior to K-Rool's arrival, and I can see that, but I don't feel like it paid off. They could have made a temple area, as that's a pretty interesting and underexplored level theme. Maybe rearrange the order to have Kremkrok be the final world, as I think that works best as the finale. Now that I think about it, I have vague memories of Chimp Caverns originally going to be a volcano world, but due to time constraints it got cut. This would make a lot of sense, but unfortunately I can't seem to find any source on this, so take it with a grain of salt. If anyone can find a source, that'd be much appreciated. But as it stands, way too much time is spent in caves and mines in this game. Donkey Kong Country is known for its stellar soundtrack, and I'm not here to argue with the consensus on that. Well, for the most part. Given the detail that went into the visual presentation, the music matches this to bring the atmosphere together. It's a pretty atmospheric and moody soundtrack. Though sometimes it can get a bit too atmospheric. This does a fantastic job of setting the mood and matching the aesthetics of the environment, the way you constantly hear drops of water and how it sounds echoey. There's no mistaking this for anything other than a piece made to set the mood in a dark and dank cave. But it's not one I ever really want to listen to outside of the context of the game, and also, given the amount of cave levels, you tend to hear this one often. But that's not the most ambient track in the game. Once again, sets the mood perfectly. The atmosphere in these levels is impeccable and the music is part of that. But it's not exactly an earworm. But that's okay. It serves its function perfectly. I mean, how many games, especially platformers at the time, came even close to matching the amount of atmosphere this game has? You could put this in a horror game and it'd fit right in. And this is a game about some monkeys trying to get their bananas back from a crocodile. Don't worry though, because this soundtrack is more than just ambience. There are some absolute bangers in this game. The title theme is a great rendition of the classic arcade theme, or well, the NES version more specifically. It starting sounding more like the original theme before transitioning into the new remix of it is fantastic, and mirrors the dynamic between DK and Cranky. But what's more known as the main theme of Donkey Kong Country is the jungle music, DK Island Swing. This is quite the iconic track, and I have a love-hate relationship with it, this version especially. It is a great track, but there's one issue. So okay, it starts with a rather lengthy buildup of drums. It's a tad long, but that's fine. And then we get to the main melody, and this is where it really shines. I adore this part. And it's over. You get like 30 seconds of the good part, and then there's this really slow ambient part, and it lasts forever. I don't necessarily dislike this part, it's okay, but it lasts like 3 times as long as the best part. This is a persistent issue with even future versions of this theme, though most of those extend the main part, which makes them much better. This is easily the worst rendition of DK Island Swing, simply because of the ratio of the main melody to the ambient portion. Anyways, the music that plays on the map is another classic. And of course, the bonus room music. One track that gets overlooked is Candy's theme. That's really good, but because there's no reason to stick around, you just go in, save, and move on. No one really hears more than just the first few seconds. My hottest take, I guess, is that I think aquatic ambience is just alright. Don't get me wrong, the piece is rather good, but it's on the lower end of tracks from this game. Some of my absolute favorite tracks are Life in the Mines. This one is one I overlooked for a while, and have really come to love. The minecart levels are a staple of the series, and part of what makes them so iconic is this amazing track. There's also Fear Factory, obviously. is just incredible. It nails the industrial and artificial feel and contrasts nicely with the more naturalistic feeling of the soundtrack. And of course, Gangplank Galleon is incredible. The piratey feel of it and how it starts more jovial before ramping up, kind of mirroring K. Rool himself with how he seems goofy on the outside, but is a serious threat, and his fake-out defeat. Everyone knows about this game's prime composer, David Wise, and his work is fantastic, but a lot of people overlook the fact he wasn't composing alone here. Alongside him was Evelyn Novakovic, known as Evelyn Fisher at the time. There was also Robin Beanland, but he only composed Funky's theme, which was originally meant for Killer Instinct. People don't give Evelyn enough credit. Her work is just as good as David's here. I mean, she composed Forest Frenzy. Northern Hemispheres. And another of my favorite tracks in the game, up there with Fear Factory and Gangplank Galleon, Treetop Rock. That's so good, and that's another one that took some time for me to really appreciate, but come on guys. Evelyn is every bit of part of Donkey Kong Country's identity as David is. Let's not forget it. But to talk about the actual gameplay now, Donkey Kong Country, while marking a significant change for Donkey Kong, plays much like a fairly standard 2D platformer for the time. The presentation does carry this game a lot, though I think some people exaggerate this point a bit. Its revolutionary aspects do mostly come from the presentation, which is not to say the game does nothing new or interesting gameplay-wise, but this game is essentially Rare looking at Mario and saying, yeah, let's do that, but our way. And yeah, not a single aspect here sets the platforming genre on fire, but there are a lot of small but significant aspects that set this game apart, and make for a more fun experience than a lot of its contemporaries of the time. I think the aspect that stands out the most are the main characters and how they work. Donkey Kong Country is pretty unique among platformers in that you're not controlling just a single character, but a duo. You play as both Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, though you only directly control one at a time. The other will follow you and you can freely switch between them. Each Kong acts as a hit point. Take damage as one Kong, and they will run away leaving the remaining Kong alone. Should you take damage again, you die. Of course, pits don't care how many Kongs you have, though if you do fall in a pit with both Kongs, you keep both of them, so it's less punishing than being hit by an enemy in that way. Both Kongs are perfectly capable of playing through the game single-handedly, but they do have some different attributes from each other. DK is heavier, which allows him to jump on enemies Diddy can't, like clumps or crushes. DK can also do this hand slap, which can be used as an attack, which gives you a banana when you do it, but it's quite slow, meaning jumping is often more effective. Otherwise, it's mostly just used for uncovering secrets in the ground, which is mostly just bananas and nothing useful. There's also no indication where these spots are, so finding them is a pain. You'd have to just keep slapping the ground if you want to find them, and the rewards are just bananas anyway, so it's not worth it. Diddy is lighter, so he can't defeat some bigger enemies, and he can't do the ground slap, but he runs faster. Yeah, DK got the short end of the stick here. The ground slap is just kinda useless, and being heavier doesn't matter that much. This only affects like 3 enemies in the game, and Diddy has other ways of defeating them, so it doesn't matter. Diddy moving faster just makes him more fun. Now unfortunately, as much as I tried looking, I couldn't find any information on the exact differences between the characters. Like, it's obvious that Diddy's faster and the differences in weight, but what are those exact stats? One thing I'm not sure of is if they have different jump heights. I thought Diddy might also jump higher, but I don't know for sure. It looks like he might, but that could just be because of their animations. If there is a difference, it doesn't matter too much. DK can make every jump just fine, but it would be nice if all the exact stats and differences were documented. Another one of the main differences between DK and Diddy is how they hold and throw barrels. Barrels are items you can use throughout the game to defeat enemies or uncover secrets. While holding a barrel, any enemy or breakable object or projectile will be hit by it if it comes into contact, even if you don't throw it, so they can be used as a shield, and you could just run into enemies with them, but they break when they hit anything. You can also put barrels down without throwing them, which is helpful when trying to bring a barrel to a breakable wall, but there are enemies in the way. If you jump on an enemy while holding a barrel, you will throw the barrel, so that's something to consider. Usually a hindrance, but it can occasionally be used to defeat multiple enemies. DK holds barrels over his head, while Diddy holds them in front of him. Neither is better than the other. There are situations where you want to hit something above you, so DK is preferred. But if something is in front of you, then Diddy is the safer option. They also have different throw arcs, which is also situational for which is better. For instance, this level is much more comfortable with DK's throw arc than Diddy's. There are different types of barrels with different properties. Barrels with metal bearings will roll on the ground when thrown, defeating all enemies in their path. Barrels with ropes around them will break on contact when thrown. TNT barrels, honestly, are just reskinned rope barrels. They explode on contact, but there's nothing only TNT barrels can break that all others can't. I think the explosion has a lingering hitbox, but it doesn't matter that much. It also can't hurt you, even if it breaks in your hands, so there's no risk to it. The only tangible difference is if you put one down, it will explode on its own after a couple of seconds, which doesn't really even affect things. And then there are steel barrels, which are basically the same as the normal barrels, except they don't break when hitting a wall, instead bouncing back. When they're rolling on the ground, you can jump on them and ride them, which is really cool, but there aren't a lot of opportunities to take advantage of it, and you need to make sure to get off before falling in pits. And the last main mechanic shared by both Kongs is rolling. This is the most distinguished move in the game and the primary thing that sets it apart from other similarly styled platformers. At any time, you can roll, which acts as both a speed boost and an attack. The difference in how each Kong rolls is minimal, if it even exists at all, besides animation. Diddy cartwheels, but mechanically I can't tell if there's an actual difference. I thought Diddy's cartwheel might have come out faster, but maybe that's just because he's faster in general. There are 2 core mechanics tied to rolling that elevate it from a simple attack and speed boost: roll jumping and roll chaining. When you roll, you get a bit of speed, but will stop in place, losing all momentum, unless you jump before you stop. With roll jumping, you can keep your speed up. Not Sonic speed, but still. Another really fun quirk about roll jumping that's the most known thing about it is you can roll off a ledge and jump while in the air with it. This allows you to jump farther and is universally helpful. This is something that constantly comes into play and it feels really good to perform. This isn't an accident either, this is an intended mechanic, as there are plenty of collectibles positioned over a pit where to get it without dying requires roll jumping. Roll jumping isn't required to beat the game, it's more of an advanced move. And the other mechanic, roll chaining, is when you roll into an enemy while still holding forward, you reset your roll, effectively extending the distance of your roll while also rolling even faster. And you can do this multiple times. The more enemies you roll into, the longer you keep rolling and the faster you get. I think the speed caps at around 4 enemies, but if you have a long enough trail of enemies, you could plow through them with a single roll while going really fast. Taking advantage of roll chaining is hard to do if you aren't super familiar with every enemy placement and know the best places to do it, but when you have the opportunity, it's very satisfying. The Kong's movesets are fairly simple and straightforward, but there is depth there and a lot of fun to be had with rolling especially. Even just controlling the characters under normal conditions feels so nice and so smooth that it's simply just fun moving around. This is one of the best feeling 2D platformers I've played, only beaten by its actual and spiritual successors. Donkey Kong Country lacks a traditional power-up system like Mario. It's just you and the level design for the majority of the game. Not even single level power-up gimmicks. All gimmicks come from the level itself rather than any extra abilities you gain. Some might think this makes the game boring, but I think it gives the level design the ability to design challenges tightly that you have to respect. In many Mario games there are power-ups that act as safety nets, which can make combat and platforming significantly easier. And then there are the power-ups that can completely invalidate the challenge. For the most part, Donkey Kong Country doesn't have this problem. The only safety net you'll experience is having 2 Kongs to be able to survive getting hit. You'll have to meet the obstacles where they're at, and you can't bypass them. Now I said for the most part because there is a power-up system of sorts, the Animal Buddies. Taking notes from Yoshi, there are 4 animal buddies you can find in various parts of the game that you can ride for various benefits. All of them give you an extra hit, and if you take damage you'll be knocked off and they'll go running. They run away really fast. It's only possible to catch them if there's a wall ahead they bounce off of, or a hole they can get stuck in. But in such cases, you can recover them, like with Yoshi. Individually, they're less complex than Yoshi and Mario World, but they each have something unique to help you out. Rambi is the first one you'll find, and he's mainly suited for combat. Any enemy that his horn touches will be defeated. You don't even have to manually attack. You'll also move faster with him, but he has slow acceleration. Winky is the most common one. He hops while moving and jumps really high, clearing heights you'd otherwise need a tire to reach. His sprite while jumping can make it a bit hard to make landings, as he stretches his legs farther back than his hitbox. You need to land more in the center of him, not back where his legs are. Espresso isn't very common, but he's very fast and able to flap his wings to slow his descent, allowing him to clear large gaps. He also has an interesting attribute where he can walk through small enemies like claptraps and naughties, though going uphill can still have him getting hit by them. It's a bit awkward and I tend to still jump over them. He also can't damage enemies at all, so you need to avoid everything. And then there's Ungard, who's exclusively to the water levels. He's basically an underwater version of Rambi. He defeats enemies the same way and has a lunge attack to help go faster. He also allows you to freely move around in water and stay in place instead of constantly sinking. The animal buddies are essentially Donkey Kong Country's power-ups. Their primary use is to make things easier, but they're still unique. They're not in every level. In fact, the amount of levels they're in is pretty small, and it gets smaller the farther in the game you go. They're also hardly just given to you. Most of the time they're rewards for exploration, like finding Rambi in Oil Drum Alley, Winky in Bouncy Bonanza, and Espresso in Temple Tempest. Ungard is in every water level, but he tends to be out of clear view and pretty well hidden for a couple of them. Oftentimes, mainly with Espresso, the animal buddy is used to find bonus stages rather than to make the level easier. In those cases, it's then a challenge of getting the animal to the destination. Again, Espresso is mainly the one used for this, like in Orangutan Gang or Ice Age Alley. Winky does make getting certain bonuses easier, but there's usually an alternative way to get them. And Rambi is mostly there to make enemies easier to tackle. The animal buddies are fun to ride, but with how sparingly they're used and the fact that you can lose them, meaning levels have to be designed around not having them, limits their potential. There's one other animal buddy who works differently, but he's only in one level, so I'll talk about that later. The game progresses in a linear level-by-level progression with no deviations in level order. It starts with a full map of DKL where you can select the individual worlds. When you've completed a level, the path to the next one will open up and you can freely move between them. The icon of levels you haven't beaten will be that of a Kremlin, but they will change to the face of the Kong that finished the level once beaten. This is a fun detail that lets you keep track of which Kong you might be favoring. The Kong that beat the boss also gets their face on the entire world. For some reason, when you start the game, you move from this already beaten area to Congo Jungle, and there's no way to go back to it. Maybe it's implying that's DK's treehouse, but his treehouse is also in Congo Jungle, so it's kinda weird. Across the maps you'll run into the other Kongs, with their own functions. Cranky is pretty useless. Aside from emotional and physical abuse, he'll spat out a random assortment of phrases, mostly about how things were better back in his day. Near the end of his rant, he'll give out some actual tips, but they're not that useful. I never bothered to pay much attention to them. There's no real reason to visit Cranky as you play. Funky will provide you with a special barrel plane which is used to move between the worlds on the map. This is the only way to move between areas. Once you're in a world, you can't leave until you get to Funky. And then there's Candy, who will let you save your game. You can't save anywhere, nor does the game autosave, so you have to do it here. Oftentimes, Candy is placed really far into the world, so if you're struggling with a world, you could potentially have to redo a lot of levels if you game over. Even as early as Congo Jungle, she's all the way at the end right before the boss. A kid playing this for the first time who isn't very good at the game could potentially get stuck in the first world, as the level right before her is a bit tough for beginners. And while she is fairly early in Monkey Mines and Creme Croc, she's right near the end in all the others. Now if you have access to Funky, you can use him to go to the previous world and save there. But in Gorilla Glacier, one of the harder worlds in the game, not only is she near the end, but Funky is past her, so you have no ability to save until you're 80% through the world. This isn't an issue for me since I played the game to death by this point, and know how to get a ton of lives, so I will never get a game over. But this can be pretty punishing for kids, and players inexperienced with platformers. I don't think the game benefits from having the save point so far in the worlds. They should have been placed sooner in most cases. The actual level design is very straightforward and linear. Nearly every level is as simple as a straight line. The terrain will vary, but the vast majority of the time you'll be going from left to right. The geometry of the levels is pretty simple. The main challenge comes from the obstacles rather than the terrain itself. There are various obstacles and objects you can interact with that are used throughout the game. Each level has exactly one checkpoint barrel. If you die, you'll continue from here. These will be at the halfway point of the level, so you have a good idea of how far you are. Some levels have ropes you can climb, often used to dodge enemies, but can be used to get to higher areas. Some ropes move while others swing. The swinging ones will always put you at the bottom, so all you need to worry about is when to jump off. But the timing for that is always simple. There's never any real challenging parts with these. Barrel cannons are a very common occurrence. They are these floating barrels that, when you jump into, you can fire yourself out of them. Plenty of obstacles are built around barrel cannons, even entire levels are about them. There are two types of barrel cannons, the normal ones in which you manually fire yourself out of, and the automatic barrel cannons which fire you in a set direction the moment you jump in them. You can't control how the manual cannons move. Sometimes they'll be still and it's as simple as hitting the button to move on, but most of the time they'll be moving in various ways and you need to time when to fire to get to the next platform or cannon. Sometimes they'll move up and down or side to side, sometimes they'll turn or rotate a full 360 degrees, or they can do both. The automatic cannons mostly stay still and it's a matter of just getting to them, but sometimes they'll be moving and you need to make sure they are pointing where you want to go before you jump in. Barrel cannon sections can be one of the greatest sources of challenge in the game. Most of the time a single mistake can lead to instant death. Some of these have irregular patterns or have enemies in the way, making figuring out the best times a bit tough. And the barrels that spin fast can be difficult to time on their own terms. But getting the timing down is very satisfying. The instant feedback is gratifying. The automatic barrels could have been a big pain if they didn't fire off immediately, but their consistency makes figuring out the timing pretty simple. Tires can also be found frequently. You can bounce off them to get to higher places by timing your jumps on them. There are various challenges involving them, and they often are used for finding secrets. Mostly the type that you can push around, so you need to find the right position to get the secret. It can be easy to accidentally push it off a ledge, but leaving the area and coming back will respawn the tire. There's a wide variety of enemies scattered around that are often used in creative ways. The actual design of the enemies is pretty simple. Most of them will just kind of walk back and forth, and there is some overlap. Naughties, critters, and slippas aren't very different from each other mechanically, mainly in how tall they are, which doesn't matter much. Height only matters regarding Espresso, who can walk over small enemies, but that doesn't come up very often. Critters can jump, which does add a bit of challenge, and they can be placed pretty creatively. Claptraps are pretty similar to those, but you can't roll into them because of their teeth. Weight is a factor for some enemies, but only some, 3 to be exact. Clumps are basically big critters. Diddy can't jump on them, though he can roll into them, and DK has no restrictions. Crushes can't be hurt by Diddy at all, not even rolling into. He can only defeat them with a barrel. Weirdly, DK can jump on them, but not roll into them. And then there's armies, which are more interesting than Clump and Crusha. They will roll into a ball and keep attacking you for a few seconds before uncurling. DK can defeat them at any time by jumping on them, but if Diddy jumps on them while they are rolling, they'll get knocked out of the roll, to which Diddy can now jump on them. Both Kongs can also cancel their rolling by rolling into them themselves. Armies are one of the more interesting enemies in how they function, though it still hardly justifies the weight mechanic. The actual design of the enemies is pretty simple. It's more about how they're used in the levels. Take Nekis, for example. They are simple flying enemies that can stay in place or move in various patterns, or most of the time, just to the left. They use these simple enemies in a bunch of creative ways, like having a barrage of them come at you while you're on a rope, or having them blocking your way on a rising platform. Sometimes they are used as temporary platforms. Zingers are pretty similar, but they're covered in spikes so you can't jump on them. You'll need barrels or animal buddies to defeat them. They'll be used in combination with Winky to make sections easier by letting you jump on them. There's a couple enemies that use projectiles, like some Nekis and Neki Juniors throw nuts, and there are various patterns you'll have to deal with. One of the strangest enemies is Monkey Kong. He throws barrels, which, as a callback to the arcade game, is pretty great. But Enemy Kong is interesting. We don't get much information on him, just that he's a reject. There's also enemy spawners in some levels. They will constantly spawn enemies, and the only way to destroy them is with TNT, but there's rarely any time you can actually do this. The enemies that spawn are the smaller types. Most of the time it's slippas or naughties, but armies can also come out of them, and those can be tough to deal with. Now, while the enemies are used in some cool and creative ways, they are unfortunately the main source of death by screen crunch. So the Super Nintendo's aspect ratio is 8:7, which is thinner than 4:3. That's not a lot of screen space, but when worked around, you can make games not feel cramped, even with this. Mario World doesn't have screen crunch issues, but Donkey Kong Country has big detailed sprites, which eats up a lot of the screen space, meaning you'll have less time to react to enemies or obstacles. Now, it's not an unplayable amount of space, but there are times where enemies just come out of nowhere and it can feel unfair when you get hit by them. The camera does pan ahead of you a bit, which does help, but sometimes it's just not enough. It's especially bad in auto-scrollers where you're going forward, sometimes pretty fast, and enemies are actively moving towards you, giving you a small amount of time to react. Again, it's not unplayable, most of the game is not a problem, but there are specific places where it does crop up and make some levels harder than they needed to be. There are a handful of collectibles throughout the game, and while Donkey Kong Country is a fairly straightforward platformer, there's some collecting and exploration involved. Bananas are the primary collectible as you'd expect. They come in singles and bunches worth 10. Collecting 100 of them gives you an extra life. As standard for the time, there's a live system. Can't exactly blame them too much as that's just what platformers had back then, but I don't like live systems in pretty much any game. Very few games I think benefit from having lives, and Donkey Kong Country isn't one of them. Thankfully, this game is on the lives are too easy to obtain, thus making them completely pointless side of the spectrum, instead of lives are too uncommon that you're constantly running out and redoing a ton side. That does make some exploration less satisfying though, as being rewarded another life kinda deflates the discovery a bit. It is better than the alternative, especially given the save system this game has, but it's a completely unnecessary mechanic that would have been better off not existing. Unfortunately, you can't simply take them out as they occupy the spot for the primary reward for all exploration. All collectibles lead to more lives and nothing else. You'll find life balloons through general exploration that come in 3 varieties, red giving you 1 life, green gives you 2, and blue gives 3. There are 4 Kong letters that spell out Kong in each level, usually out in the open, but can be hidden like any other collectible. Since they are in a linear order, they are also a way of knowing how far you are in a level. When you collect all of them, you're rewarded with an extra life, and that's all they're for. And as I said, collecting 100 bananas gives you an extra life as well. If you removed lives with no other change, there'd be 0 point to picking up bananas or exploring for secrets, as you'd literally get nothing for it. Not to mention having a common collectible like the bananas scattered throughout the levels is actually a very good thing to have in platformers, as they can be used in many ways to point players in the right direction. Something as simple as lining alternate paths with them or forming an arrow pointing you somewhere, or even just a single out-of-place banana where you'd think nothing would be. This is good design that the game is better for having, but unfortunately, we have to put up with a pointless live system that doesn't add anything to the game, and makes exploration less exciting. But anyways, there are a couple other types of collectibles. On your file there is a completion percentage. It maxes out at 101%. There are only 2 things that increase the percentage: progress in the game and bonus stages. Hidden throughout most of the levels are these bonus stages, which you enter either by a hidden barrel cannon that automatically shoots you to the bonus, or by breaking a wall and entering with a barrel or rambi. Once inside a bonus stage, you are presented with a simple challenge. Most of these are just for collecting bananas and other collectibles like lives or even Kong letters. Occasionally you'll get animal buddies out of them. These tend to be simple and quick. Just enter, collect the bananas, and sometimes fire yourself out of barrel cannons. These ones are funny because you're supposed to time when the barrel is pointing at the next one, but if you mash, you just go through all of them no problem. That doesn't work with the ones that rotate though. Also, this single bonus room in Manic Mincers is open by default and is the only bonus to not play the bonus music. Besides those, there are various minigame bonus stages. You'll have to pay attention to which barrel the item ends up in, match 3 of the same item, spell out a word without hitting the wrong letter, spell out Kong with these barrels, or jump on claptraps to get more bananas. These are alright, but they rarely change significantly, so they just get repetitive. The bonus stages are required for getting 101%, but strangely you don't have to actually beat them for them to count. Just simply entering the bonus is enough. Falling in a pit, getting hurt, or failing the minigames doesn't take that away. This is nice since these can get repetitive, and sometimes you just don't want the reward. Also, you don't need to beat the level for them to count. If you missed one, you can just jump back in, enter the bonus, then manually exit the level and it will still count. The amount of bonus stages per level is inconsistent. It can vary wildly. Some levels only have one bonus, but generally the levels have 2 or 3. Weirdly enough, Orangutan Gang has 5 bonus stages in it, and 3 of them are this very simple type nowhere else in the game where you just jump on a tire and hit the ground for your reward. Why is it like this? 3 of them are also very close together, even using the same barrel to uncover them. The only way you can tell if you got all the bonuses in a level or not is by the title of the level. Having all of them gives the title an exclamation mark at the end. Not every level has any bonus stages though. None of the water levels have any, nor does Minecart Carnage. The other minecart level, Minecart Madness, does though. Beating these levels will give you an exclamation mark by default. The main appeal to the bonus stages is finding them rather than the challenge within. They can be really satisfying to find, especially if you've been searching for a while. These bonuses can be very well hidden. Some are just out in the open and you can't miss them. Some require paying attention to the environment and looking for stray bananas or enemies in suspicious locations to jump off of, or examining every wall every time you get a barrel. But then there are ones in such asshole locations that there's no reasonable way you could find them without a guide. You'll get barely a hint to some of these, or the camera won't show it unless you stop and look. This one in Minecart Madness not only requires you to jump to this rope, but also jump off screen to a barrel with the only indication being the lack of bananas in the middle. Or this one where you have to climb this rope with a zinger on it to jump into an off-screen area. Okay, this one is barely poking out of the bottom of the screen. Even emulated on a modern display with pixel-perfect quality, it's hard to see if you're not looking for it. Imagine playing this when it came out on a CRT. Some of them are just in pits. Like, there's no visual clue for this one being down here. Or down here. Yeah, be sure to shoot down here, but not over here. Jump off this moving platform in this specific spot, but not over here. This one, you shoot yourself into a wall. This one requires you to go down this pit, and then another one immediately after. Like, you can't just put them in pits with no clues. Now it's like, if you don't know where one is, it could just be in any of these pits. These aren't well or cleverly hidden. Unless you literally just fall in every pit in the game, you'll never find them without a guide. And then there's the most infamous bonus stage of all. The bonus stage within another bonus stage. In Oil Drum Alley, you have this typical matching bonus, but if you do it normally, you won't get the second bonus. You need to choose the single banana. You'd never intentionally do this. You'd be going for any of the other rewards, and even if you accidentally hit the banana first, you'd probably just intentionally get the next one wrong just to end it faster. But once you get all 3 bananas, it drops a barrel, and you need to use this barrel to break the wall to the right. But wait, when the barrel breaks, the bonus ends, so you don't enter the next one. So in order to enter it, you need to pick up the barrel, and then jump above the wall and fall into it so the moment it breaks, you go in. There are so many layers of cryptic bullshit to this one bonus, it's astonishing. I can guarantee no one has ever found this on their own without looking at a guide, being told about it by someone else, or given a hint. I do not believe anyone is capable of finding this with no outside help. But on the other hand, because it's so cryptic, it's now legend, and people do know about it because of how dumb and notorious it is. And as stupid as this is, I do kinda love this secret and admire the effort behind hiding it. Here's the thing, getting 101% doesn't get you anything. You'll get a little star on your file, that's it. No extra levels, or bosses, or ending, or even dialogue. So can we really be mad at a game for putting in stupid cryptic secrets no one will reasonably find? Sure, it may not be good design, but you don't lose anything for not finding it. Can't secrets just be secrets? I mean, someone is bound to fall in this pit and tell others about the secret they stumbled upon. Someone will miss with this barrel and find this secret eventually. Okay, maybe no one would find the bonus in a bonus. Or won't they? Some very dedicated people will find anything by trying everything. Do you think this would never have been found if there wasn't a strategy guide? People find new things in old games all the time. I do wonder how long it would have taken people to find the bonus within a bonus if there was no guide they could buy. People dedicated to finding all secrets in the game, all noticing Oil Drum Alley had one more they couldn't find, and banding together to comb every inch of the level until someone tries something insane and finds this barrel. Now imagine the community effort behind finding this one secret, had it remained a secret. Instead, the answer to this was put in some magazines, so that magic moment of people working together to find this never had the chance to happen. Someone would ask someone else if they know what bonus is missing, and they'll just pull up the strategy guide and the mystery is solved. And if it came out today, way, people would just data mine the game, so it'd be on the internet in days, if not hours. I just think really obscure secrets are pretty cool and something of a lost art. Now, I don't like it when these kinds of secrets are tied to completion. Make finding everything hard, but not damn near impossible. But random hidden rooms or secrets with nothing of in-game value in it? Yeah, go crazy. This bonus is tied to completion percentage, but 101% doesn't do anything. So as much as I talked about a lot of these bonuses being too cryptic, it's not really a criticism. These are just bonuses for extra lives, so does it really matter if you don't find them all? I can't say that the bonus stages are greatly designed or placed, because they do have problems with cryptic placement and repetitive design, but I think they add more than they take away, serving the element of exploration. And as dumb as a lot of their placements are, I can't help but love how stupid it gets. I'm glad we're in a world where Donkey Kong Country has these bonus stages rather than not having them at all. There is one other kind of bonus stage, though these are purely for lives and don't affect the percentage. Throughout the game, you'll find these animal tokens in the shape of the rideable animal buddies. They could be in the levels themselves or given as rewards for beating a bonus stage. If you collect 3 of the same type, you'll be taken to a special bonus stage for the animal you got the tokens for. All of these are the same. You control the animal buddy of the tokens you've got in an area full of smaller tokens. The goal is to collect as many tokens as you can before the time runs out, and for every 100 tokens you collect, you get an extra life. Each of these stages also contains a hidden big token that doubles your current token amount, so you want to wait until you have a lot before you double it to get even more out of it. Though they are very well hidden. The Winky one is easy to find since it's just all the way to the left, and in guard isn't too hard once you figure out you can go through the walls in each of the 4 directions from the center. But for Espresso, you have to find out you can fly over this wall. And the Ramby one, for some reason the timer for the Ramby one goes down at light speed. Like, what the hell is this? It says you have 99 seconds, but those are the fastest 99 seconds ever. You thought the timer in the original Super Mario Bros. Was fast. Just look at this. It's actually around 30 real-world seconds, which is less than a third of what the timer tells you, and isn't a lot of time for this. For all the other ones, you have a comfortable amount of time to get a good amount of tokens before going for the multiplier. It's very easy to get 6 or 7 lives on each of the other ones, without trying too hard, and even beyond that with more optimal routing and better play. But with Ramby, you have to haul ass if you want similar results, and that's if you manage to get the multiplier. On top of the strict time limit, this is the hardest big token to get, because to get it you need to go back to the start and jump across these platforms, which is hard to do when you jump off screen, and they're a bit narrower than they look. It's not fast getting there either, and they don't have any tokens on them, so you need to make sure to collect a bunch before you start jumping across. So you barely have the time to get a decent amount before you can double them. If you know what you're doing, you can get as many lives as the others. I actually managed to get 7 lives during my recording, which is the first time I've done that. Usually I get like 5. But I also can get 8 lives out of Espresso, and much more comfortably. The rewards you get out of it is not proportional to the amount of effort it takes to get good enough to do this, so why go for it over Espresso? And for players who are new or not as good at the game, who need more lives, they wouldn't be good enough to consistently get the double, so it's really not worth going for. I've gotten pretty good at getting to the big token, but it's taken a lot of practice. And yeah, it is satisfying being able to consistently get the big token, but it's not worth the effort. Regardless, these Animal Buddy bonuses are the easiest way to get lives in Donkey Kong Country. Even if you don't get the doubles, you can still get 3 or even 4 lives out of them. As mentioned, Espresso is the easiest one to get a ton of lives in once you know where the big token is. Getting 7 or 8 lives out of it is really easy. And these are very grindable if you're having trouble and need more lives. But in spite of how useful these are for getting lives, these are the worst part of the game. The main reason for this is that they're really pace-breaking. You could just be playing the level, and if you happen to pick up your 3rd one, well, now you have to do this for a while. At least the Ramby one is fast. But the bigger problem is when you finish them and are spawned back into the level. So when you finish a normal bonus stage, there is a specific exit point in the level you're put. Every time you finish this bonus, you'll enter back into the level here. There is not an exit point designated to each animal token, which all have the potential to be your 3rd and thus initiating the bonus stage. So the way it determines where you spawn in the level is either it will put you at the level's checkpoint if you passed it, or the respawn point of the last bonus stage you exited from. This means if you haven't gotten a checkpoint, or haven't gone in any bonus stages, you'll be put back at the beginning of the level. Or hell, even if you have gotten the checkpoint or a bonus stage, you're likely being put farther back in the level, and have to redo parts of it. This is really annoying and just makes me not want to get these. The only time the place they respawn you isn't a problem is if you get the third one from a bonus stage, and then it drops you at that bonus's respawn point. But that, combined with the time it takes to do them and how they just interrupt the game, makes them pretty tedious, especially the farther into the game you are. It doesn't help that they always have the same layout, so you're just repeating the same thing over and over again. Later in the game, I'm actively avoiding these, and intentionally failing bonus stages that reward you with animal tokens. And the more of these you do, the more pointless they are, because you'll be swimming in lives. It's really easy getting a ton of lives. Halfway through the game, I'm already at 99, which is the maximum that's displayed. Your actual life count goes beyond 99, so you'll just die and the number won't go down. This is functionally infinite lives. Anyone who can get this many lives will not lose them. Nothing in this game is hard enough for that to happen. Not only does this add to the tedium of the Animal Buddy bonuses and make them pretty pointless later on when you have more lives than you can count, this makes the bonus stages kind of pointless as well. Sure, if you want to go for 101%, you need to find them, but their main purpose is getting lives. When you functionally have infinite lives, this becomes meaningless. And because a lot of these bonus stages repeat, it can get a bit tedious. Thankfully, because all you need to do for them to count is enter them and not beat them, you can just lose immediately and get out of them faster. It never becomes a problem, really. Well, the Animal Buddy ones do, but the normal ones are fine. But it's a pretty underbaked part of the game. They add a lot of value by adding exploration, but the rewards for that exploration is underwhelming. So now for the levels themselves. I won't go over every individual level, but let's go through the worlds. Congo Jungle is the simplest world as you'd expect. The levels are straightforward without any complicated gimmicks and are mostly there to teach you how the game works. The first level teaches you a lot of the basic mechanics of the game. People have analyzed World 1-1 from Super Mario Bros. To death and how its design teaches you how to play the game. But I think Jungle Hijinks deserves a lot of attention as well. It gives you room to get used to the controls and quickly introduces the concept of Kong barrels, which also gives you Diddy to teach you about the two Kong system. At the start, you can climb your treehouse to take the higher path, which leads to a hidden metal barrel. And further on, you have to jump on an enemy to reach the treetops, where a bunch of lives are if you successfully jump across. This teaches you that skillful play and paying attention to the environments can lead you to alternate paths where you'll be rewarded. You'll also face clumps in this level, which teaches you about how only DK can jump on them, although that does rely on you playing as Diddy, otherwise that lesson will come later. But it's not unlikely a new player may have taken a hit as DK before this point. You get to play around with a normal barrel, and a Neki is throwing nuts nearby, which is a great place to learn that barrels will block projectiles. Further on, you're introduced to animal buddies with Rambi, the simplest one to control. You're also likely to collide with this wall, revealing the first bonus stage, which tells you that they exist, and that they may be hidden behind walls. Afterwards, there's a clump which you learn Rambi has no trouble beating, so you know animal buddies are strong enough to get through the toughest enemies. This is a fantastic opening level. I'm not going to go into this much detail for the other levels, though. Oftentimes, levels are centered around a specific gimmick, like the second level Ropey Rampage is all about swinging on ropes. The third level, Reptile Rumble, is all about these jumping Kremlings. The final level of the world, Barrel Cannon Canyon, is the first real test in the game, as it's all about barrel cannons. Though as hard on this concept as both the sequels go, this game doesn't commit to making every level have its own gimmick. There are a lot of levels that don't really introduce new things or have a centralizing gimmick to them, which can lead to some levels not leaving much of an impression. This first world is generally pretty good at it, even if the gimmicks are very simple, but there's also nothing in the first world that isn't repeated later. Last thing of note for this world is it's also here where we have the first water level. There are 4 of these across the game, and they're not very remarkable. They control like Mario water levels. You move down automatically, and you have to jump to swim up. You can use the D-pad to go faster in whatever direction you want. There's no difference between DK and Diddy underwater. Coral Capers is very basic, just teaching you about the water levels, but doesn't do much else. And the second one, Clam City, isn't much better. All it has going for it are the clams that shoot pearls at you. Otherwise, it's just more water level. The third one, Croctopus Chase, is the best one, as it actually has a gimmick to it. You have the Croctopi chase you down linear sequences, and that's about it. It's more interesting than the others by default, but still nothing to write home about. And the last one, Poison Pond, might just be the worst level in the game. It's not awful, but it's another uninteresting water level, and this time, the screen crunch is a problem with these mincers everywhere. The end has a barrage of fish come at you, a pain to get past if you don't have on guard. I know it's cliche at this point to complain about water levels, and it's often exaggerated anyways, as there are plenty of good water levels in many games, including this game's sequels. Pretty much every water level in the series past this point is solid. Water levels aren't inherently bad. It's mainly the older Mario water levels that suck. And these levels, again, aren't even really bad. They're just boring, for the most part. Monkey Mine starts off a bit weak. Winky's Walkway sure is a level, I guess. It's really short and doesn't have anything really unique about it. You get Winky in the level, but it doesn't really take much advantage of him. There are a couple spots where jumping high or on zingers helps, but the level is also built to be beaten without him, so I don't know, it's probably the most nothing level in the game. Here, we have the first minecart level, what would become one of the most iconic parts of the series and a staple of it from here on out. These are fast-paced auto-scrollers in which you ride a minecart and have to avoid obstacles along the way. There are only 2 of them in this game though, and they both work a bit differently. Minecart Carnage is structured to where when you jump with the minecart. This is a very straightforward level. The first half has you mainly avoiding pits, but after the checkpoint you start getting Kremlings and minecarts coming at you that you need to avoid. And this is where the level gets pretty hard. We have the screen crunch problem returning, and you don't have a lot of space to see them coming. But also, they're moving towards you while you are moving towards them, giving even less time to react than usual. Better hope you have some good reaction time, because otherwise, you'll be needing to trial and error your way past it. Now, I love this level, but I've played it a lot and have gotten good at it. So good I can consistently do it without getting hit. But it's a difficulty spike being in the second world, and also the first level of its kind in the series. There is a super shortcut at the beginning of this level that takes you right to the end, and this level doesn't have any bonuses, so there's no consequence for skipping it. But the hard part comes after the checkpoint, so if you're struggling and want to use the skip, you'll have to get a game over to do it and redo some levels. The second one, which is in Kremkrock Industries, Minecart Madness, is much easier, and I don't know why these levels weren't swapped. It would make much more sense if Madness was the first one and Carnage was the late game challenging one. Anyways, Minecart Madness is a bit different as you jump out of the minecart and are constantly swapping carts. This opens you up to jump to different paths, and there are bonuses in this level you can find by doing it. I prefer the style where you jump with the cart, but this is still a fun level, and doesn't have the screen crunch issues. There are Kremlings in minecarts, but they aren't moving, and are there for you to take their cart, so it's much easier. Seriously, these levels should have been swapped. I will say, between Winky's Walkway and Minecart Carnage being misplaced, Monkey Mines is probably the weakest world in this game, which isn't to say it's bad. The rest of the levels are good. Millstone Mayhem is fun with a good gimmick. Bouncy Bonanza, while lacking a unique identity, is a good level, and Stop and Go Station is one of the most iconic levels in the game. Here we have Rock Crocs, who are exclusive to this level. These enemies run very fast back and forth as long as the lights are green and can't be killed. To get past them, you need to hit these barrels to turn the lights red, which will cause them to stop and curl up. So this level is all about making sure they aren't moving so you can get past them, and making sure you're moving fast enough. The atmosphere and the spookiness of this level is incredible, and it provides a fun challenge. There is also a warp at the beginning to skip the level, but you'll be skipping the bonuses as well. Vine Valley is probably the best world overall, as it has the best diversity of level themes with no cave levels. And the levels themselves, while none that are stand out like Stop and Go Station or the minecart levels, are all solid. Vulture Culture makes good use out of the barrel cannons and neckies. Treetop Town is just a great level and possibly one of the best barrel cannon focused levels in the game. Forest Frenzy is a good auto-scroller where you move up and down these ropes to dodge enemies. And Temple Tempest has you being chased by these beavers and millstones. Like, there are no bad or even subpar levels. The low point is Clam City, which I already mentioned when talking about the water levels. Orangutan Gang is also here, and I already mentioned the 5 bonus stages in it, but it is just a fun level on top of that. Not much to say about this world other than it's pretty good. Gorilla Glacier is where the game starts getting tougher, especially with the first level, Snow Barrel Blast. This is another barrel cannon level, and the hardest one. A lot of barrels spin really fast, making timing particularly challenging here. Not helping is that the level starts getting covered in a blizzard, until it's covered most of the screen. It's not that hard to see, at least on modern displays. I wonder what it was like on a CRT. There is a barrel that skips the hardest part, and it's after all the bonuses, which is helpful, and can be easy to accidentally fall into though. Some consider this the hardest level in the game, and it's up there, but nothing in this game is that difficult. It's tough, but not that bad. This is a good world, but there's only really 2 other levels of note here. Slip Slide Ride is a really unique level, even beyond it being the only ice cave level in the game. This is the only level that contains vertical platforming. Every other non-water level is basically a straight line, but this one will have you going up and back to the left, then up some more. It's really odd that this is the only one like this. They're clearly capable of designing levels like this. Well, I guess one reason they wouldn't make more is that this level kind of makes it obvious that this game wasn't quite built for vertical platforming. The camera has a harder time showing you what's above or below you. This level has some pretty egregious examples of death by screen crunch. This part right here might just be the single worst case of it in the game. It's not so bad for most of the level, and once you've played it before and know what to expect, it's not hard to get around it, but this is still a problem. Otherwise, this level is about all these ropes that you either slide up or down automatically. Not sure what's making you slide up, but okay then. Also in Gorilla Glacier is this cave level, Torchlight Trouble, and this level has a unique animal buddy, only found here, Squawks. Here's a photosensitivity warning. There's going to be some flashing lights ahead, so if that's an issue, please look away. I'll tell you when it's safe to look again. Torchlight Trouble is dark. Too dark to see normally, but they give you Squawks right away, and he carries a light with him. This light only covers this cone in front of you. Simple gimmick, but there's a bit of an issue with it. When you turn around, Squawks also turns around, but he faces the camera while doing it. And to be immersive, I guess, they represent the light facing the camera with a single frame of the entire screen being white. This happens every time you turn around. This level is pretty linear and straightforward, but you'll still have to turn around when making adjustments unless you play perfectly. I get the idea of this to be more immersive, but if you have a problem with flashing lights, this can be a pretty painful level. The gimmick isn't even a creative one. There's a much better level later on about being too dark to see and needing to turn on lights, and that one doesn't flash your eyes. I don't have any issues with flashing lights, so this doesn't bother me personally. I can play this version no problem, but it's still a dumb design choice, and it's one they realized was dumb. Alright, the flashing lights are done being shown, so you can come back now. In all future releases of this game, they removed the single white frame, and the light looks so much better now in addition to being playable for people with photosensitivity. If you're playing this on Switch or anything other than the original Super Nintendo version, you don't have to worry about this at all. Crimcroc Industries is also a contender for the best world in the game, though loses to Vine Valley simply because of the lack of level diversity. Though it does have the factory levels, which is my favorite level theme. Oil Drum Alley is one of my favorite levels. It doesn't do anything unique, only the flaming oil drums, which show up near the end, but it's just a really good level that is enhanced by its atmosphere. Blackout Basement is also really solid, but its gimmick is that the lights keep flickering, and the only things you can see in the dark are yourself and bananas. Even with that, it never feels unfair. The amount of time the screen is dark is small, so you always have enough time to see what's ahead of you. Aside from Poison Pond, the rest of the world is pretty enjoyable too. Trick Track Trek is another auto-scroller that can be a little boring at points, but it's got some cool obstacles. Though weirdly, this clump never falls down. Now while Chimp Caverns is the most boring thematically, the levels are all pretty good. None of them are slacking. Tanked Up Trouble is a more interesting level than Trick Track Trek, since you have to make sure to keep grabbing fuel on your platform. Misty Mine is simple, but the atmosphere is great, and Loopy Lights makes much better use out of the darkness mechanic than Torchlight Trouble, though I question the use of a new type of claptrap that jumps when you jump. They are colored differently, but because of the lighting, you might not be able to tell. Aside from a bonus stage in a previous level, this is the first appearance of these guys, so you might not be prepared for them. But when you know that these are the ones that jump, they're used pretty well. This last one is a bit of an asshole though. And the final level, Platform Perils, is a good send-off, though it doesn't quite feel like a last level if I'm being honest. This level has a new type of Crusher that not even DK can jump on. That's just the case because this level is all about these moving platforms and having to throw barrels at the Crushes on the next one. Overall, this is a decent assortment of levels. Nothing mind-blowing, but the level design is consistently good, the low points not even being that bad. Just a bit underwhelming or boring. That's it. There could be more uniqueness in the levels with having more level-specific gimmicks that don't come back in later levels, but otherwise, good lineup. At the end of each world is a boss fight, and they take up their own level so you don't have to worry about playing through a level to get to them. And wow, that's it, huh? That was kind of pathetic, but it was just the first boss. Yeah, this second boss is a little better, I guess, but still pretty nothing. Okay, this one's not bad, but still nothing special. And we have a recolor. Wow. This one is an enemy rush. Really? Okay. The bosses in this game are extremely underwhelming. They're better than your typical 2D Mario boss simply because they take more than 3 hits, but like, wow. Very Naughty is the first one, and you simply have to jump on him. This is Boom Boom with more health. He gets faster every hit, not like it will really matter though. Master Necky Jr. has you avoiding projectiles before you can jump on him, at least, and you'll need to use a tire to reach him. His elevation constantly changes, but this is still quite simple. Queen Bee is one of the better ones, but her pattern is still so simple, and because you have to use a barrel to hurt her, you can just hold it in front of you and she'll run into it. Next is Really Naughty, who is a harder version of the first boss, and he is a bit tougher. After every hit, he'll do a big jump, and he'll do one more for each hit. This can potentially catch you off guard the first time, and his horizontal speed gets really fast after a few hits, which can also take you by surprise. But once you know what's happening, it's very easy to counter, and still is pretty easy. Dumb Drum is as dumb as its name. It tries to land on you, then spawns more enemies, then tries to land on you one more time than before, and eventually it just kills itself. What is this? Enemy rushes can be fun, but when it's just what the boss entails without anything else to go with it, really? This is a boss? It literally kills itself. And the last normal boss is a recolor of the second boss, Master Necky Sr. It's the same as before, except he shoots an additional nut after every hit, which can be a bit tough to dodge in the small arena, and you can't hit him until he spat out all his nuts. But again, it's really not that hard or very interesting. Standards for bosses in 2D platformers back then were very low. Hell, there are very few bosses in 2D Mario I'd even consider to be good at all, even in recent entries. At least Donkey Kong Country doesn't have a hard rule of 3 hits for the bosses, so it has that over Mario, but otherwise, these are some weak fights. But there is one more encounter. King K. Rool is the final boss, and he's available from the DKL map after beating Chimp Caverns. This fight is actually pretty neat. He's got some interesting attacks, some that are actually challenging to avoid, and he has multiple phases, keeping you on your toes and varying up the fight. He starts by throwing his crown, which opens him up to be jumped on, and he does this after every attack. His first phase is K. Rool throwing his crown, then running across the arena, which you have to jump over, doing that an additional time for each hit. Then he'll do a big jump to the other side, which will cause cannonballs to rain down from above across the arena. This phase is the hardest, as the window to go in between them is a bit tighter than you'd expect, especially if you're DK. I always like to jump with him when he's winding up. After the round of cannonballs, he throws his crown. One thing that's nice about this is that since the arena is too big to fit on screen, the camera will pan over to him when he's about to throw his crown, giving you an indication that it's coming. Every hit will increase the waves of cannonballs that fall, and after the final blow is dealt, K. Rool is down, and the credits roll. Just kidding, it was a fake out. Time for phase 3. I love this moment. If you've been struggling with this fight, you get this moment of relief when you beat him, but then nope, there's still more. This phase is pretty simple. He'll hop across the arena and then throw his crown again. When this phase begins, you'll be standing in a safe spot. He'll just jump over you so you don't get hit by a cheap shot. Each time he takes damage, he'll jump across the arena an additional time, like phase 1. But the distance of his hops will decrease, giving you a tighter window to go under him. It can be tricky, but not too hard, and you'll beat him before you know it. You know, this isn't a super tough fight or anything, but it's much more interesting and fun than the others. There's also more personality with K. Rool himself over the just bigger normal enemies the other bosses are, and the fake out credits are great. K. Rool is a solid final boss. It's too bad the rest of the bosses kinda suck, but at least they're inoffensive rather than frustrating. Last thing of note is there's actually a couple multiplayer modes. 2-player contest and 2-player team. 2-player contest is basically how older Mario games handled multiplayer. The 2 players take turns playing through the game. Player 2 actually controls yellow versions of DK and Diddy. It's funny, you can tell they just palette swapped red for yellow. Even the inside of their mouths are also yellow. Player 1 will play a level, then will swap to player 2 who plays their level. It's basically a race to see who can beat the game first. Though if both players never die once, then player 1 just wins since they go first. This mode isn't very interesting. It'd be more fun to play simultaneously, which I know wouldn't be simple to implement at the time, but you just achieve the same feeling by swapping controllers every level. 2-player team is the better mode, because in this, each player controls a specific Kong. Player 1 gets DK, and player 2 gets Diddy. You're still taking turns, as only one Kong can be controlled at a time, but this is a much more interesting and fun way to play with a friend. At any time, you can swap the controller to the other player manually, and are forced to switch when you get hit. Also, when you get hit, the game will pause to make sure the other player is ready to take control. The game does keep track of how many levels each player beats, so there is some competitive element to it. Nothing mind-blowing, and not the most amazing multiplayer experience there is, but it's a fun way to play the game with a friend. And that's Donkey Kong Country. But did you really think I'd leave it there? Nah, I'm covering all versions of this game, including Donkey Kong Land. In between Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, a new sub-series got its start, Donkey Kong Land on the Game Boy. To say this is a Game Boy port, would be inaccurate though, as this is a whole different game with new levels, bosses, gimmicks, and story. But it is essentially an effort to bring Donkey Kong Country to handhelds, which, not sure how you would translate this to Game Boy, but we'll see. As I said, there's a new story here, though none of it is in the game at all. No missing Banana Horde and no NPCs to talk to. None of the other Kongs are in the game, not even Cranky. But I suppose that's to be expected from a Game Boy game. So let's look at the manual. You know what I said about not caring for the meta elements in Country's manual? Well, to be honest, I wouldn't have even brought it up if not for Land, because it's really not a big deal in Country, but here, oh boy. The plot of Land is that Cranky is scolding DK and Diddy about how he believes the only reason Donkey Kong Country was successful was the graphics. Put a few fancy graphics and some modern music in a game, and kids will buy anything nowadays. Eventually, DK snaps back. People like Donkey Kong Country for more than just the fancy graphics, you old coot. The number of colors, the resolution, it doesn't make a difference. It was just plain fun. Diddy also chimes in about how hard they worked to defeat K. Rool, but this was just bait, and they fell for it. Cranky then offers a challenge. So, you're saying that an adventure like your last one would be a success even on an 8-bit system, like Game Boy, for example. And of course, the two take on the challenge. And then Cranky calls up K. Rool to get him to steal the Banana Horde again. So the fourth wall has been completely shattered. Apparently Donkey Kong Country was a game within its own universe, or something. The characters know they're just video game characters, and this just goes against the spirit of Donkey Kong Country. A game that went really hard on naturalistic environments and an immersive atmosphere. Not like Mario with its wacky worlds and nonsensical geometry. DK Isle felt like a real place. So these meta elements, I feel, take away from it. Again, I think it's fine when just restricted to Cranky's ramblings, but not the entire story of the video game. There is some funny dialogue here, sure, and yeah, the premise is so ridiculous that it does wrap around to being a bit funny, but it's not my ideal vision for Donkey Kong Country. Also, Cranky's an asshole, but not a having K. Rool on speed dial and tell him to steal their Banana Horde asshole. Like, what? Yeah, I'm not really a fan of the story for this one, but at least this is the worst it gets with the meta stuff in the series. We should probably get on with the visuals. How the hell do you translate Donkey Kong Country to Game Boy? There's way too much detail that you could not directly port over the art style. Well, their answer to that was, fuck it, port it over as directly as possible, visibility be damned. Good lord. Okay, yeah. It is impressive just how much of Country's visuals they managed to replicate on a Game Boy. But it looks like a mess and I can't see shit while playing. This is an overly ambitious game for the system, and while I can admire the attempt, it didn't pay off. This just looks ugly. A mess of pixelated garbage that actively hurts the game because the backgrounds and sprites are so detailed they blend in with each other. It's very hard to see yourself, and even more difficult to see the enemies when you have backgrounds like this. Look how hard it is to see these enemies, like seriously. If they weren't moving, they'd be invisible. Not every level theme is like this. There are ones that have just plain white backgrounds, or less detailed ones, and it is better in those levels. But in jungle, snow, cave, and oh god, the cliff levels, this is just visual barf. This much detail doesn't work in monochrome. Like, tell me, where is the enemy I just got hit by here? I just died suddenly. Can you see any enemy on screen? And this is made worse by other factors. For one, the Game Boy obviously has a lower resolution than a Super Nintendo. Donkey Kong Country already had some issues with screen crunch, but good god is it bad here. The sprites for DK and Diddy are pretty much the same size as on Super Nintendo, but on a smaller screen, and that's a real problem. Unless you've memorized the game, you can't go fast without running into enemies. You have to tiptoe through it. They try to alleviate it by having the camera move ahead to give you more room to see, but it's not enough. And the way the camera moves is also barf-inducing. Even without the visibility issues, this is just unappealing. It is impressive that they could replicate the Super Nintendo visuals to any degree, but, well, you know the Jurassic Park line.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Man, I can't imagine trying to play this on an actual Game Boy. I'm just emulating it. But having an actual tiny-ass Game Boy screen with no backlighting sounds like hell. How did anyone play this? Now, let's try to be fair, because barring playing on a physical Game Boy, I am playing the worst version of it. There are other ways to play Land. Unfortunately, playing this on a Super Game Boy doesn't help much either, in spite of the promising title screen. Though they seem to have forgotten to color in Diddy all the way. Why is there only a splotch of red on his hat, but not all of it? Super Game Boy does add color, but it doesn't improve anything because the sprites and backgrounds all use the same palette, so they still blend in. The only thing this really does is have a different color palette for the different themes, but that doesn't improve visibility. You can play Land with a Game Boy Color though, and would you look at that? The sprites are a different palette from the background.
I can see!
I can fight!
This drastically improves visibility, though it doesn't solve the screen crunch or screen shaking. Still, being able to actually distinguish enemies from the background goes a long way. If you want to play this game, this is the way to do it. Unless there was yet another version to consider. Someone actually made a hack of the game to more directly port Land to Game Boy Color. This is an unofficial method, but it is pretty cool. Again, doesn't solve the screen crunch or shake, but by God, you can actually understand what you're looking at. The official way of playing on Game Boy Color may still be a tad more helpful, as there are some instances where enemies might blend a bit, even in this hack, but it's not a big deal. Either one of these are strong methods for playing Land, though most of my footage was in monochrome as that's the default experience, and to be honest, I really didn't want to play more of this game. One more thing about the visuals, the theming. I'm not sure if you're on DKL. You might start out there, but by the end you definitely aren't on the island. While this game does share some level themes from country, like jungles, snowy mountains, temples, and coral reefs, there are new themes as well. You have levels that are actually on the Gangplank Galleon instead of just the final boss. And this was before Donkey Kong Country 2 introduced this location. A new type of water level is here, which is a flooded temple ruins, along with a cliffside theme, and a weird sky area. Not really a fan of the sky areas for multiple reasons. They really stand out. Even as limited as Land is at making the world feel naturalistic, it still upholds that vision from Country as best it can. But these feel more like Mario themes with how abstract they are. I don't care for it. And then there's the final world, which takes place in Big Ape City. And here we have city levels, construction site levels, and airship levels. I'm not sure how to feel about Big Ape City. I get it is a bit of a reference to the arcade original, and Donkey Kong Country wasn't shy in referencing it. But with the emphasis on naturalistic environments and the beauty of nature that Country strives for, this feels really out of place. Anytime an industrial element is present, it's treated as something unnatural or bad. The atmosphere of the factories in Country is cold and oppressive. Big Ape City isn't treated that way. The music is upbeat, the atmosphere isn't conveying anything negative about the city. It's like how Mario would present a city level, like New Donk City. Both cities referencing the same thing, and treated pretty similarly. People speculate these are the same city, which I'm inclined to agree with, but that's not how Donkey Kong Country ever presents these kinds of places before or after. It's more of a nostalgia trip. DK's back in the city. And as much as I get it is a reference to the arcade game, it's just really out of place and feels inappropriate, almost surreal to control Donkey Kong in this environment. I suppose that does make it an interesting final world as something that's very different and unusual. Although I have no idea why K. Rool is here, overall I feel neutral towards Big Ape City. It seems one of the things people like about this game is the originality and creativity of themes. But honestly, I think that's overblown. Like, really, it's just Big Ape City. That's it. Like, sure, the cliffs, ships, and underwater ruins are new themes, but like, they're not that interesting or creative. The sky levels are fine additions, I guess, but is that it? Some sky levels that are honestly more in line with Mario than Donkey Kong? Anyway, one thing I'll give this game is that the themes are also exclusive to their worlds. World 1 is all the jungles, snow levels, and ship levels. World 2 has the 2 types of water levels and the temple levels. World 3 has cliffs, caves, and the sky levels. And World 4 has the city, construction, and airship levels. There is a better balance of the themes in this game compared to Country. No overabundance of caves here. Now let's talk about music. The soundtrack of this game is interesting. It comprises of new original tracks and renditions of tracks from the Super Nintendo game. Obviously, the amount of ambience and atmosphere Donkey Kong Country soundtrack emits wasn't gonna make the jump to Game Boy, but they make a good effort of translating some of those tracks to an 8-bit format. Hey, that's not a bad version of Jungle Swing. And it doesn't have the slow ambient part, which is a plus for me. Some of the more atmospheric pieces get a bit more of a funky beat to them. Weirdly, the map is not a rendition of Simian Segway, but instead Bonus Room Blitz. But hey, we get a remix of Gameplank Galleon, which is quite nice. It also goes in a bit of a new direction after a point. Most of the tracks in the game are original, and I'm somewhat mixed on them. I don't know, I'm kind of indifferent to this new main theme. Sky levels are alright. But the city levels just sound okay to me. There are a couple I do really like though. The caves have this really neat track. I wouldn't mind this coming back in the future entry. And goddamn, they went hard on the boss music. I like that a lot more than Gundry's boss theme. Fun fact, this track got a remix in Blastcore, oddly enough. The soundtrack was good for the system, and the renditions of the Super Nintendo tracks were handled well, but obviously this doesn't hold a candle to Country's soundtrack. Alright, let's get into the actual game. And being upfront about this, I really do not like the gameplay of Donkey Kong Land. As in, I really don't like it. It's pretty far down the list of 2D platformers for me, near the bottom. I'm honestly baffled that people seem to like this game. I just don't see what there is to like about playing it. So the basic gameplay remains the same. You've got the two Kongs with more or less the same differences. DK can't do the ground slap anymore, but that's not a big loss at all. Also, you can't put down barrels you're holding, which is annoying. You can still climb ropes, Although if a rope is going off screen, it's no longer there, so you can jump through them without grabbing them if you're at the top of the screen, and this is very irritating. Although this game did introduce being able to move across ropes horizontally, and I appreciate that. Rolling functions mostly the same, but extending the roll by hitting enemies seems different. Instead of just continuing the roll, they seem to just do another roll after the first one finishes. This doesn't feel nearly as good. What also doesn't feel as good is, well, just the movement in general. Moving around and jumping is not as smooth as on Super Nintendo, and this is the kind of thing that's hard to describe, but it just feels a lot clunkier to jump. Making jumps that would be easy on Super Nintendo do not feel nearly as good in Land. At first, it's not so bad, but as the game goes on and the levels become more complex with smaller platforms, basic platforming starts being a real hurdle. Jumping when you aren't going full speed doesn't let you jump as far as you could on Super Nintendo, which makes it very easy to misjudge jumps, and makes smaller platforms annoying to jump from in 2. My god, the small platforms are the worst. Collision is harder to pinpoint as well, which adds even more stress to trying to land on something, enemies included. Bouncing off enemies also doesn't feel good, and you just feel like you're losing control when you do it. It's also very difficult to make micro adjustments. Trying to just slightly move a bit or turn around is incredibly finicky. You'll do small taps on the D-pad and nothing will happen, so you push a little harder and then you go too far, or fall off the platform. Not helping matters is the screen crunch and visual clutter. Clunk is the word I use to describe how this game feels. You're always on edge controlling it. You'll never know if it will function how you'd expect or if you'll miss a jump because you weren't moving fast enough on a tiny platform. And getting ahead of myself here, Land 2 and 3 control significantly better, like damn near 1-to-1 with their Super Nintendo counterparts. So this isn't a hardware issue. Nothing ruins a platformer more than bad control, and there is a difference between bad controls and purposefully restrictive controls. Castlevania has very restrictive controls. You are locked into your jump arc and can't move in the air at all. But the game was very deliberately designed around this. Castlevania controls really well to where it's not clunky at all. It's very consistent and any deaths you face are entirely your fault. But here, the inconsistent momentum and difficulty with micro adjustments, along with the visual issues and so many other baffling decisions, makes playing this game feel horrible and super frustrating. And that's it, really. The game feels bad to play, which in turn ruins the game. If I don't enjoy the act of controlling my character in a platformer, how can you possibly save it? But there's more issues that add on to make this game simply one of the worst 2D platformers I've ever played. One of the most baffling and frustrating parts of the game is how it handles taking damage. As we discussed earlier, in Donkey Kong Country, you're controlling 2 characters, and when one gets hurt, he runs away and the other one takes his place in the same spot where the first got hit. Simple, smooth, can help out in a bad spot too, since it lets you jump out of it. So Land, being a Gameboy game, obviously and reasonably doesn't have both Kongs out at the same time. But now you can't tell if you have 2 Kongs, there's no indication. It's not a big deal, it's not too hard to remember if you still have the other, and you can check by trying to switch. However, if you die by falling in a pit, you lose your extra Kong, which is really annoying. Thankfully, the Game Boy Color fan hack actually does give you an icon to display having a Kong in reserve, and this is very helpful. Anyway, when you get hit, instead of the other Kong immediately taking your place, you have to sit through this animation of the Kong falling back, then falling off screen, and finally the other spawning in a little behind via tornado. This is slow, but not too bad, except this causes one massive issue. The second Kong doesn't spawn where you got hit. They need land or a rope to spawn, which means if you get hit in the air and there's no land on screen, you just die instantly as if you only had 1 Kong. Look at this. And yeah, I did have another Kong. Actually, let's just watch this play out, so you know I'm not lying. I threw a DK barrel here, so I have 2 Kongs. And then I die instantly. The fan hack showing you having an extra Kong gives even more definitive proof that this happens. Sometimes, even if there is land on screen, you still die instantly, if you haven't landed on it. I can't believe this is how it works. What the hell were they thinking designing it like this? What other game has something like this? I've never heard of another platformer that kills you instantly if the ground is slightly below screen. And this scenario is fairly common given the screen crunch issue. You've never played a Mario game and had a fire flower but died instantly by getting hit in the air while the ground wasn't visible. I can't overstate just how baffling this is. How did this happen? Did they not realize this could happen to players? Ugh. So progression in Land is pretty similar to Country, but there are some slight differences. It still advances level by level, but the worlds are connected. so you can freely travel between them. This means that Funky isn't in the game, but that's not really a loss of mechanic. There are a couple spots where there is a fork in the road. You'll have two paths, both blocked by boulders, and at the end of a different level, you'll find some explosives. You can then blow up a boulder to unlock the path. Both paths will end up leading in the same place. It's just a way to choose which level you want to go to first. I don't get the point of this. There's only 2 instances of this in the game, the first 2 worlds, and it's not like the different paths really change much. In the first one, you have 1 level on each path before they join together again. What's the point? Also, if you want to play all the levels, you have to replay the level with the bomb in it, because you can only blow up 1 boulder at a time. And in the second world, instead of 2 paths blocked by boulders, it's 1 with 2 open levels with bombs. Basically, what this amounts to is 2 optional levels in the game. That's it. Both the third and fourth worlds are completely linear. I don't get it. You can save your game, but it works differently. You don't have candy around the map to act as a save point. Instead, you can theoretically save after each level. You can't choose when to save, nor does beating a level offer you the option. In order to save, you need to collect all the Kong letters in a stage and then beat it. Only then will the option appear. This is annoying. Sure, you can save more often, but it can be a pain if you miss one in a level, especially if you're low on lives. There were times I was on a particularly hard level which forced me to backtrack to the first level for an easy save. Other collectibles are the same as Country. You've got bananas, which getting 100 gives you an extra life, and of course you can find lives in levels. No green or glue bananas though on account of the lack of color. Also no Animal Buddy tokens, and thus no Animal Buddy bonuses, which is fine, though now we lack an easy way to gain lives. There is a new collectible, these Kong coins, throughout the game that don't seem to do anything, and it is a bit strange what they are for. So some bonus stages will take you here, with a button that shoots out coins from this barrel cannon which is constantly moving and turning. This isn't quite obvious at first, but the amount of coins you collect will be the amount you can shoot out of the cannon, and every coin you collect gives you an extra life. This is a weird system, but yeah, the coins are essentially a currency for the extra life minigame. You can potentially rack up lives quickly at this if you're good enough, but I don't know if I'm just not good enough, but I found it really difficult and awkward actually timing the button press to get the coins to go where I want, and then actually grabbing them on top of that. Very rarely did I manage to get any decent amount of lives out of this. I didn't like this much at all. Bonus stages are still here. Aside from those coin collecting ones, they're different from Country, but still follow the same philosophy of mainly being for collecting bananas, lives, and coins. Though sometimes they contain Kong letters, which can make trying to save annoying if you can't find them. You don't have any of the minigame bonuses like tracking which barrel the item is in, hitting the letters in the right order, or jumping on claptraps, which makes the bonuses pretty boring. Those were repetitive, but at least they were more interesting than just picking up bananas in a room, and they could have expanded on them with land. You find bonus stages the same way as in Country, usually a barrel cannon or breaking open a wall. Though there's also ones where you have to land on a certain spot from high enough and grab the rope as it ascends. There's really nothing else to them, and just like Country, there's no reward for 100%, so I didn't bother getting them all after a certain point. You can easily see which levels you've gotten all bonuses from the level map, which is nice. And once again, you don't need to beat the level for it to count. And it still counts even if you fail a bonus, so that's nice. Getting into the level design itself, this game is pretty straightforward even compared to Country. A lot of the one-off gimmicks from Country weren't carried over. There aren't any minecart levels, which is probably for the best given the problems with visibility. Another thing lacking is the animal buddies. There's only 2 of them in this game, Rambi and Espresso. Winky and Ungard are not here, which isn't a big deal in Winky's case, but Ungard would have been really nice to have in the water levels. The animal buddies are barely even in the game. There are a couple levels with Rambi in them, including the first level, and I think there was only one with Espresso. Most of their appearances are in bonus stages. They more or less work like they do in Country. You can't manually attack with Rambi, but that's never really added anything anyways. And Espresso can now jump on enemies, strangely. I also found he can't fly quite as far. If you get hit while on them, they don't run away, but just stand in place, letting you jump back on them, which is very helpful in the limited times you get to use them. The most annoying thing about them is that you lose them if you enter a bonus stage, or if you get one in a bonus stage, they don't come with you when they leave, and this limits their use even more. Actually, they seem to be unable to go in barrel cannons at all, though there's not really any normal barrel cannons for them to go into. Almost feels pointless to even have them. And of all the animal buddies, I think Ungard should have been picked to greatly help with those water levels. Getting into the the new things this game has, it actually introduced vertical levels. Yes, there's actual vertical platforming instead of it always being left to right in anything other than water levels. The vertical platforming sucks because of the small screen space, so often you just jump into an enemy you couldn't see. Trying to jump down when you can't see below you also is a problem. It'd be nice if you could look up or down so you could actually see, but visibility wasn't a priority in this game. Oh, but the best part of vertical platforming levels is this shit right here. Now you might think I just fell into a pit, but let me assure you, there was more level down there. You can't fall from a high part in a level because off-screen becomes a bottomless pit. Even here, the level starts with a couple ropes, but if you jump off the ropes at the top, you die. I was just down there. This isn't a pit. That just kind of sums up this game. It's super inconsistent. The platforming feels inconsistent. Hitboxes feel inconsistent. The very rules of the game are inconsistent. The game can scroll up and down. This can't be a limitation. This has to have been an intentional design decision, right? I can't fathom as to why they would design it like this. Looking at some of the more interesting levels, this one has these tornado things, which are a little confusing at first. They hurt if you touch their sides, but if you jump on top of them, you'll bounce. They will actively move towards you on the ground, but when bouncing on them, they can mostly keep up with you so you can keep bouncing. But you can outrun them and then fall on the ground next to them so they can hit you. These just feel awkward to use. I see what they're trying to do with them, but they're just not fun. This level is all about one of the new enemies, the Nautilus. Basically, once you entered the Nautilus's zone, they will relentlessly chase you down until you leave their territory. This is basically this game's version of Croctopus Chase, but much harder and much more annoying. You can't tell what area is the aggro zone, so even if it stopped chasing you, you can't tell. The screen space is a real problem. They can easily off-screen you because of this. This might be the worst water level in the series. It's long and so annoying to get around these things. The cloud levels, oh god, the cloud levels are awful. Okay, the third one isn't so bad. It's just a linear platforming level in the clouds. Not sure why this is the last one. But the first one has you riding on this platform. It's basically Trick Track Trek, but the platform is tiny, and as I said, it's difficult to make micro adjustments. It's so annoying. You're prone to instant death if the platform isn't on screen. Getting past the zingers is a pain, and it's just boring. It's the same obstacles over and over. But that's not the worst of it. The second cloud level, Sky High Caper, is the worst level in the game, bar none. This is another one where you're riding a small platform, so again, hard to stay on and make micro adjustments. But this platform acts a bit differently. If you stand on it, it will just automatically go for a while, no problem. Then it gets stuck here. This platform changes directions when it hits a wall, and also when you jump on it. You have to steer this thing by jumping on it. Again, a small platform in a game where it's difficult making micro adjustments and landing exactly where you want. And this level isn't short either, it goes on for a while. It's a frustrating gauntlet. The only redeeming thing about it is there's a warp right at the start so you can skip it, and I did it after beating my head against the wall for a while. This has to be the worst level in the entire series. This level has a really weird gimmick. Very quickly, you collect all 4 Kong letters. They're all right at the start, but then you hit this button that takes the Kong letters and makes them into platforms. And that's what the level is, getting the Kong letters to make platforms. It's, interesting, I guess, but why make them Kong letters instead of something else? They're how you save the game. I'm not sure how this idea was formed. None of the level's specific gimmicks are any good. Maybe some interesting ideas, but none of them landed. Most of that is more so the fault of the control and overall feel of the game rather than the gimmicks being bad ideas in themselves. But regardless of the cause, none of them are very fun, and the other non-gimmick levels, which is most of them, range from boring to frustrating because of the control and visibility issues. Now for the bosses, and whew, they're also pretty pathetic. Maybe even more so than Countries. Besides K. Rool, not a single one hit me even once. They're that easy. The first one is this manta that you just jump on and nothing more to it. Then there's this clam that will spit projectiles at you and you make him aim for these shells which will reflect them. Figuring out these will reflect its projectiles is harder than the actual boss. It's super easy to avoid his attacks. The third one is this mole who you just jump on him when he appears. They're all pretty nothing. They have a bit too much health, but they never get any more complex, so it doesn't really matter. Then there's K. Rool. So yeah, only 4 bosses. He's the only one that possesses any kind of challenge, but damn, he's small. I mean, there's not enough screen space if they tried keeping him the same size as Super Nintendo, but he's smaller than Diddy. His fight is pretty similar to his fight in Country, or really, he just throws his crown and that's the majority of the fight. He'll start running across the screen before the crown comes back, but that's about it. He doesn't run across the arena more times for every time you hit him, just once, every time. It takes 6 hits before he does anything different. And this is the only reason he has any challenge, because he'll blindside you by jumping over you. You'll expect him to run, so you jump right into him. It's not hard when you know he'll do it, but you will get hit by it the first time. Or every time until you actually count how many times you need to hit him before the phase changes. And then he does this 6 times before going back to throwing his crown, and that's it. That's the fight. K-Rool was the one good boss in Country, but here, it's just tedious and boring. Shouldn't really expect any fun bosses out of this game, I guess. Yeah, I just don't like Donkey Kong Land at all. There's some interesting ideas here, but all of them are undermined. It is impressive how much of Country's visuals they were able to replicate, but it's hard to appreciate that when in practice it's ugly to look at and actively makes the game worse to play. The new themes are nice, I guess, although I think people oversell the creativity. It's mostly just the city levels that are unique. No, the flying pig enemies don't make this game creative. The game plays so badly anyways, that it doesn't matter. I don't know what people see in this game. This is easily one of the worst Donkey Kong games. With all this being said, it sounds like Cranky was right. But actually, this game sucking proves him wrong. Because it's not the graphics that prevent this game from being good, it's the gameplay. Donkey Kong Country worked because it was a fun game. This doesn't because it's not fun to play. Donkey Kong Land is an actual example of graphics taking priority over gameplay, not Country. Country had very impressive graphics, but it also had the gameplay to back it up, flawed as it may be in some areas. Donkey Kong Land has impressive graphics for the system, but the visuals are confusing and hard to read as a result of not taking the hardware into consideration, and the gameplay suffered not just from that, but also the poor physics and some baffling design decisions. This game just plays badly, unlike Country. We're not done with the Game Boy though, because in the year 2000, merely 4 months before the Game Boy Advance came out, they made a port of Donkey Kong Country to the Game Boy Color. Unlike Land, this is a direct port of the Super Nintendo game. It's all the same levels as the original. This is such a strange port. I get the idea behind Land. The Game Boy is doing well, so why not put a Donkey Kong game on it? Obviously, just porting the Super Nintendo game isn't going to cut it on account of, well, look at it. So, make a new game. The final product is still a bit too ambitious for the hardware, but whatever. But then, later, they decide to actually port Donkey Kong Country to the Game Boy Color. And while it is an improvement hardware-wise, it's not that much of an improvement over the original Game Boy. Certainly not enough to handle Donkey Kong Country. But even stranger, unlike Land, which did get sequels alongside Country's sequels, this is where this ends. There's no Game Boy Color versions of Donkey Kong Country 2 or 3, just one. I mean, the Game Boy Advance was 4 months out from releasing, so they probably thought it wasn't worth trying to port 2 or 3. And they'd be right, but then why make this one? Well, whatever the reason, they made it anyway. I actually had this version growing up as well, so unlike Land, I can experience it as intended. Well, through a Game Boy Advance. I don't have a color. The footage is still from emulation though. So you start the game up and don't have the Super Nintendo intro, but instead you'll get one of 3 renders crunched down for the hardware, along with an actual menu that's just a screenshot of Donkey Kong 64's menu. No, really, it's not just a reference to it, it is the same. That's DK's model from 64. There are some references to 64, like some minigames I'll go over later. And also, looking in the manual, it's funny seeing renders from Country, but also 64. There's such a difference in quality between them. Well, right off the bat, there are improvements from Land. Visibility is better. Everything is in color, obviously, so you're able to distinguish enemies and objects from the background. And when emulated, yeah, you can see everything you need to see. But playing on actual hardware is a different story. Again, I don't have a Game Boy Color, I played this on Advance. And when played on Advance, you can't see shit. I can't really show this to you, but it's so dark it's unplayable if you don't have a light source directly over it. Even when you do, it's not great. I also have an SP which has a backlight, and that does help a lot. You can actually see the game, but it's still not the best visibility, mainly because you're playing it on a device with a small form factor to begin with. And since it's using the colors resolution, it doesn't use all the screen, more like this much. Playing this on original hardware is not ideal, and I can't imagine playing Land on original hardware if this game is like this. As for the visuals themselves, I mean, it sure does look like an 8-bit version of Donkey Kong Country, which is a compliment. Obviously it looks nowhere near as good as the Super Nintendo version, but it is genuinely impressive how much it does look like Donkey Kong Country. Playing through an emulator on a modern screen does it no favors other than being more visible, but playing on an SP with that tiny screen, you know, it doesn't look too bad. It looks better than Land, but that goes without saying. So the soundtrack for this is interesting, as it reuses the remade Super Nintendo tracks that were in Land. The jungle, cave, temple, and water levels are all ripped from Land, even using the same rendition of Gangplank Galleon that was used for the ship levels for K. Rool's fight. But none of the original tracks were carried over, except for the cave theme, as again, they weren't going to make Cave Dweller Concert work on Game Boy. Instead, they went ahead and just 8-bitified the remaining tracks. And much like the Land tracks, they did a good job. They didn't remake every track. Misty Menace was going to work even less than the cave music, so it was just cut. And now all mine levels where that would be play the minecart music. Gives quite a different mood to Stop and Go Station, doesn't it? One thing that's really weird is that since they didn't remake Northern Hemispheres, they instead use Ice Cave Champ for them. And gives quite a different mood than on Super Nintendo. But the weird thing is, during Slip Slide Ride, the one level where Ice Cave Champ played in Donkey Kong Country, it doesn't play this. It plays one of Land's water themes instead. Why would they do that? You had the music for this level theme in the game, but you used it in the wrong place. Getting into the gameplay now, your moveset is identical to the Super Nintendo version, being a direct port that is to be expected. You can ground slap again and put barrels down. Though you now are unable to pick up barrels as you pass them, you have to hit the run button again to pick them up, which makes sense, but it hurts the muscle memory. Rolling works like on Super Nintendo, and damn you can go fast in this version. Much like Land, only one Kong is out at a time, but here you actually get an indication that you have the other Kong. And when you take damage, you just swap to the other Kong immediately in the same place like on Super Nintendo, so you don't have that instant death if ground isn't on screen bullshit. This is already sounding much better than Land. And it is, but it's still not great. The control feels better than Land, but still not Super Nintendo. Again, this is very hard to describe, but the control also feels janky, but in a different way than Land. It's not as bad as Land, but god, it's annoying to platform. You're heavier than on Super Nintendo, so you really need to roll jump across most gaps. Once again, it's difficult to make micro adjustments, so small platforms continue to be a problem. I just don't get it. Again, Land 2 and 3 got the controls right, and those were developed before this, so why didn't they just reuse those? Hit detection is also very questionable at times. You never have full confidence trying to land on enemies or small platforms. One thing I struggled with so much with the last time I played this was jumping on tires. The timing for jumping to get a bigger bounce was super inconsistent. Felt like you had to push the button well in advance instead of when you land on it like on Super Nintendo. So many parts of the game just felt awful to play. But since then, I learned how bouncing works in this version. Unlike how Donkey Kong Country usually works, where you have to push the button at the right time to get a bigger bounce, it's more like Mario where you hold the button down. That obviously makes this much simpler and easier, but like, really? Why change it like that? It just messes with people who played the original. Like, excuse me for thinking it would work like the game this is a port of. All of the animal buddies are accounted for, even Squawks, though instead of giving you a cone of light, he just brightens the entire screen, so no worries of flashing lights. The others work pretty much the same as on Super Nintendo, but with one key and baffling decision. You don't ride them, you turn into them. Now this is a feature introduced in Donkey Kong Country 2, and it was a fantastic feature because it allowed levels to be built around their movesets. Here, they don't work quite like that. The level design isn't suited for that, but more importantly, when you take damage, you turn back into the Kongs with no opportunity to jump back on the animal buddy. I get why they do this to have less sprites on screen, but like, land let you ride them. This also means you can't dismount them. If you try, you turn back to the Kongs and the animal buddy is gone. This is especially a problem because you can't break Kong barrels like this, so continue with just one Kong in the animal or give up the animal for the extra Kong. This really hurts the animal buddies. You lose the protection they give you, and you end up not being able to use them as much. Especially Winky, who is very hard to defeat enemies with because of the wonky hit detection. I barely got any use out of him because I'd lose him right away even if it felt like I jumped on the enemy. So the animal buddy bonus stages end up being where you play as them the most. They're the same, but given the weaker hardware, they're slower and there's less tokens. So you just don't get as many lives as on Super Nintendo. At least with Rambi, his timer isn't on super speed, and they even added tokens on the top path. So this being a direct port, progression is identical, and all levels from the Super Nintendo version are here and accounted for. There's not much of anything to go over with this, but there are a couple things. Bonus stages are the same, but seemingly they changed it where if you miss one and go back to get it, then exit the level without beating it, it doesn't count anymore. You need to beat the level for the bonus to count. I don't know why they changed that. There is also a new type of collectible added. In some levels, you'll see a bunch of green bananas. They'll act like normal bananas, but they also signify that a secret photo is nearby. You find it by ground slapping the right spot. All these do is unlock some art. You get stickers and letters of the alphabet. I think these are for the printer attachment, which obviously I can't make use of, and didn't bother going after these. So for the levels themselves, again, they're the same, but the difficulty is much higher thanks to the worse controls and screen space. The auto-scrollers have it the worst. First, Minecart Carnage is way too fast. With this little screen space, it's much harder to avoid getting hit. But then you have Trick Track Trek where it's too slow, and you have long stretches of nothing. It's a lot more boring than the original. But the main thing of note with the levels are two specific levels. First is Winky's Walkway, which they extended oddly enough. It makes sense as that was a really short level, but still odd. And the other is that there's actually one new level added in this version. Only one level, not sure why, but I guess that's cool. It is a way to add more variety of level themes. As mentioned before, there's a bit of an oversaturation of cave levels in Donkey Kong Country, so another non-cave level, even if only one, would be nice. Wait, what's that? The new level is another cave level? Like you're porting this game and decide you're going to add another level and you make it a cave level? Why? Like there's only one ice cave level in the game. Only one with this theme, and yeah, there's another cave, but it's more distinct from the others. This would be the perfect theme to add a second one, but nope, another cave level, and it's in Chimp Caverns as well, as if that world didn't have enough caves. Also, it's very far into the game. Playing through this for the first time, I got very confused when I got here. Like, wait, there's new levels? Nope, just this one. This is Necky Nutmare, and it kinda sucks. As the name implies, it's all about Neckies, mostly the ones that spit nuts at you. This is mostly an unremarkable level. The thing that makes it suck is way too many times you have a Necky Jr. at the end of a crawl space, so if you go fast, you'll just get hit. You need to stop and wait every time. I don't know why they made this. It adds nothing of value to the game. Another notable change is that the game now saves after each level, which is very nice because this version would be a lot more frustrating otherwise. When you visit Candy in the Game Boy Color version, you can play Candy's Challenge, which is just a unique bonus stage in each world. The first one is just the simple ones from Orangutan Gang. Like, what's the point? The others are more involved, but still just variations of the normal bonuses. You're rewarded with a banana coin for completing these, and I don't know what they do. Looking at the manual, it sounds like they unlock extra multiplayer games, but I can't really play those, so okay then. On that note, there were some other minigames added as well for some reason. First is Funky's Fishing, in which you fish. You're on a guard, and there's a boat that follows you that you want to drop the fish into. It's really simple. You lower your line, and hit the button to bring up any fish that it runs into. If you catch multiple of the same color, you get a combo, and if you get 5, you get a big increase to your time. And that's pretty much it. It's really boring, and I'm not sure why it was added. There's also Crosshair Cranky, which is a series of shooting galleries. stages. Mainly you'll be shooting Kremlings, but one of them has you making sure the animal buddies reach the end. This is kinda similar to some bonus stages in DK64, which, given the other DK64 references, this is definitely intentional. It's also not very interesting. Like, it's not bad, but why would I want to play this? And I guess that's the Game Boy Color version, and that's really it. The bosses are basically the same, aside from the jank of the game, there's nothing to talk about. Sadly, K. Rool doesn't jump off screen, so if you jump with him, you'll just get hit. Also, once you beat the game, Donkey Kong himself emerges from the Game Boy Color and becomes real. Yeah, this is a very strange port. It's better than Land, though most of that might be attributed to the parts that are carried over from the Super Nintendo version. Like not dying in midair if you have two Kongs, but you can't see the ground, is an improvement, but that's something Land shouldn't have had in the first place. Can I give credit to this port for being more accurate to the original and not carrying over a problem Land introduced? If we take Land out of the equation, this is just a worse version of Donkey Kong Country in every way. There is no reason to play this outside of the novelty of it. Maybe when it was released there was more of a point to have Donkey Kong Country on the go, but even when I was a kid playing this, I hated it because of how much worse it was than the original. Not even just the visuals, I noticed the worse controls back then as well. Today, you can play the Super Nintendo version on the go, and most people who would play this today would be emulating it anyways. So there is no real point to playing this version, outside the novelty of it. And that's not to discredit the novelty, because this is a fascinating piece of history. I think there is still value in looking at weird ports like this, even if they aren't good. I don't know why they made this, but its existence is still pretty interesting. Don't like playing it though. Well, if the existence of a Game Boy Color port wasn't questionable enough, they did end up making a Game Boy Advance version as well, though this one actually continued with the sequels. Porting the Donkey Kong Country games to the Game Boy Advance makes a lot more sense. In many ways, this is a portable Super Nintendo. Now, being honest, the Game Boy Advance might just be my least favorite Nintendo system. I am consistently disappointed and unimpressed by this thing. I just don't like the hardware. I don't care for handhelds before the Switch in general because of the sacrifices made for portability, and not even graphical power. I'm fine with the GBA basically being a Super Nintendo, but it's other stuff like the lack of buttons. Why are there only two face buttons? Another major factor is easily demonstrated by this port of Donkey Kong Country, which is admittedly an extreme case of it, but is seen as soon as you turn the game on. My eyes! Good lord, this game is bright, like neon bright. So the GBA being a handheld with a small dark screen that originally didn't have any backlighting, they had to compensate for that. The solution was generally to just make the games brighter, and Donkey Kong Country goes way too far with this. This is garish. The whole game is just an oversaturated eyesore. The colors are just wrong in so many places. Caves look like a volcano. Levels that are supposed to be at night have bright white skies. Not even the blizzard can darken things. The first level doesn't transition to night anymore. Stop and Go Station just looks ugly. The Fog and Misty Mine doesn't look as good. Dark levels just aren't dark. Orangutan Gang doesn't look like it's in sunset, but it looks hot, like the jungle is about to catch fire. The atmosphere is utterly destroyed by how bright everything is. Again, it's this bright to compensate for the GBA screen. It wasn't meant to be played on a modern display. I don't have this game on original hardware, so I can't see exactly what it would look like there, but my friend showed me how to put some shaders on it to approximate how it would look on hardware. And playing the game like this does make a lot more sense. It's still not one-to-one with the Super Nintendo visuals, but it's not eye-straining. Still, as important as it is to consider the original conditions in which a game was made for, this is not how most people are going to play the game today. This isn't how I first played it. Most people aren't going to go out of their way to get a GBA if they don't already have one, and get a physical copy of this game just to play it. Most people will emulate it, and most people won't know about these shaders. And when you're emulating this version, at that point, why not emulate the original? Because even if these shaders make it look better, it still doesn't hold a candle to the original. There are some other visual changes besides the colors and brightness. There's some small details added, like there being a lot more bananas in the horde, and some extra critters around. Look at this lizard, he's so cute. That's the best part of this game right here. Only thing I'll compliment about the visuals. In-game animations aren't quite as good. They're mostly fine, but some aren't as smooth, like with On Guard. The timing on certain things are off, like when entering the banana horde, it plays the bonus lose music immediately instead of waiting a second like the original. Also, the fake out with K. Rool is way too fast. Like, let us savor the moment. Let us have time to realize he's getting up. The map screens are completely redone. though they're pretty zoomed in so you can't see all or most of them at once. I don't think these look bad, but I'm not a fan of them, as they look like they were made in a different art style to the originals. They're less detailed and obviously brighter. They don't match the in-game visuals at all. The original maps looked like how the game looks. They matched the pre-rendered sprites. These new ones look like early 3D renders, but not in the same style as Donkey Kong Country's. There are some extra details that are weird, like Vine Valley is covered in temples, but there's only one temple level in that world. It's the forest world, something conveyed in the original map. It's also really bright and doesn't have that beautiful sky of the Super Nintendo version. Krem Kroc has a lot more buildings on it, even though the factory levels are only at the beginning and the end. The rest are caves and a mine. In Chimp Caverns, it looks like a volcano. This is really weird. I know I said the cave levels looked like they were in volcanoes, but like, were they self-aware about that? This also would make sense if the thing I heard about this world originally being a volcano world is true. But the levels are all the same. Also, there's a minecart track in here, even though this world has no minecart levels. Visually, this version is just uglier. Like, the only part of the visuals I even like are the extra little critters around I mentioned before. But otherwise, the colors just ruin it. That's not the only part of the presentation that's significantly worse. The sound design is just awful. First off, the music. There's not much to say except that I hate how the GBA sounds. It's one of my biggest problems with the system. I just do not like the sound hardware at all. There are some games that can make it work when properly built for it, like Wario Land 4, but even those are held back in some ways. Mother 3's soundtrack is some black magic I can't comprehend. I have no idea how they made that sound like it does. But regarding Donkey Kong Country, it's the same soundtrack as on Super Nintendo, but it sounds like it's coming out of a GBA, which I don't like at all. Okay, they aren't just rips of the original tracks, they are remade for this version. There are different sound effects being used, which both still sounds bad with the sound quality, and just doesn't fit right with the tone anyways. God, that whistle in Forest Frenzy is gross. Also, they removed the opening part of the main theme, calling back to the original arcade game. I just don't like the way the GBA sounds, and there is no escaping that GBA sound here. Some tracks are changed. Treetop Rock has a different opening for some reason. Really don't know why that was changed. And they changed both Funky's and Candy's themes. There's some new tracks related to the new minigames and a new intro theme, but they're nothing special. There's nothing else to go over here. The GBA sound hardware really hurts the soundtrack and really takes away a lot of the atmosphere. And it's not just the music, the sound effects are significantly worse. It's not just because of the sound quality, for some reason they changed a lot of the sound effects. Firstly, DK, Diddy, and K. Rool now have voice clips added from DK64. And look, I do really like their 64 voices in DK64. I don't think they fit in this game at all. This and 64 have different tones and atmospheres, and their sound effects fit each game, but they don't work with each other. It's just wrong hearing DK64 Donkey Kong in this game. Though I will say, the sound he makes when falling into a pit is hilarious. But worst of all are the changes to the enemies. What the hell is that sound? The enemies just sound annoying, and how could they take away the critter hit sound? Oh no, what about Crusher? How could they do this? How could they take away the most iconic enemy sound in the series? This right here is a travesty and alone makes this version inferior. All this, the visuals and sound design, take away from the grounded and moody atmosphere of the original and makes it more cartoony, and that doesn't fit with what Donkey Kong Country was going for. There's some added story to this version. There's a cutscene depicting the story summary from the Super Nintendo version's manual. You see Diddy defending the Horde but being beaten, and DK waking up to Cranky telling him to check his bananas. The dialogue is ripped right from the manual, though not all of it is here, and obviously the narration is completely missing. It's more like an abridged version of the manual story. As I said before, I prefer the way the story is presented without this intro, and so as neat as it is that they recreated it here, again, I prefer not having it. And a lot of the atmosphere of that story is missing without the descriptions of the scene and what led up to it. There's no build-up, it just kinda happens. And of course, the existing presentational issue of this port takes away from it. They also added bits where Cranky appears after beating a boss to comment on it, and like, cool, he makes a quip that's not even very funny most of the time. I don't think these were necessary either. After beating K. Rool, there's a new ending scene. The original ending was very minimal, but given how simple the rest of the ending was, a simple scene of returning to Cranky, who actually congratulates you for once before seeing the Banana Horde return to its former glory, was pretty nice. Instead, talking to Cranky takes place still on the ship, with the same dialogue including telling you to check your Horde, except you don't look at your Horde as part of the ending. Instead, you get the character roll call here, then an extra scene of all the Kongs on K. Rool's ship. They're just kinda standing around, Candy and Funky congratulate you, while DK and Cranky want to go home. Then K. Rool walks in and is like, "Make yourselves at home." Then DK, or Diddy, I can't tell, just yells, "K. Rool!" Like they'd be surprised he'd be on the ship moments after beating him on his ship. K. Rool tells them he's leaving and that they should get off his ship or he'll destroy DK Isle. If he's capable of doing that, why not just do it? Also, how could he do that? Him wanting to destroy DK Isle was the plot of DK64, but by this point, that wasn't his intention, so he wouldn't have the means to do it. Anyways, the Kongs believe this threat, even though they just got done beating him up, they could easily do it again, but they leave while DK declares, "We will meet again, K. Rool." And why would he say that? Feels more like something K. Rool should be saying to DK. He even says he'll be back after. Just, why does this scene exist? The dialogue isn't fun or charming, it doesn't add to any of the characters, in fact I think it actively takes away from them, especially K. Rool. A part of his threatening presence is taken away when they're just casually talking like this. It feels very cartoonish. I like the idea of DK and K. Rool having a very silent rivalry. Their disdain for each other goes beyond words. I know I'm interpreting this through the lens of future games, however, those games are in the past compared to this port, and seeing how K. Rool is depicted in those games, and it not being how he is here, just, I don't like it. We had a nice simple ending for the original, and now we have this. In every way, the atmosphere has been stripped away from this game, in part by technical limitations, and also by some weird decisions that I don't understand. Well, let's actually get to the game, and this won't be too long. This is a pretty faithful port when it comes to gameplay. It controls more or less like the Super Nintendo version, which, thank God. Though something about it feels just slightly off. Whatever it is, it's subtle enough that I can't quite pinpoint what it is, but I found it a little harder to play than on Super Nintendo. Maybe there's some slight differences in an input delay that's throwing off my muscle memory. Maybe it's just because I came off the other handheld games and they were messing me up, or this is just a placebo. But it felt not quite as good to me. Way better than the other handheld games though, that's for sure. Now for the stuff I do know, there aren't many notable changes to control or moveset. Bouncing off tires and enemies works like Game Boy Color, so holding the button instead of timing the button. Animal buddies are all here and accounted for. Squawks doesn't blind you when you turn around. It works like the later releases of the Super Nintendo version, which is good. Though not like this light is needed with how bright it is anyways, at least emulated. Espresso, however, is the only one that really feels different. For some reason, he's a lot heavier than before, so you really need to mash the button to stay in the air. And this makes getting one of the bonuses in Ice Age Alley nearly impossible. I can't do it. I've tried so many times, but I can't make this gap. And unlike on Game Boy Color, it's not low enough to get without him. I can easily make this gap on Super Nintendo. Why is it so much harder here? Speaking of Animal Buddies, the Animal Buddy bonuses, while mostly the same, have some slight differences in token placement. Most noticeable is the Rammy one now has tokens on the top route to the multiplayer like on Game Boy Color, which is nice. The timer on it also doesn't go at light speed as well, thankfully, so this one is just better. Although one annoying thing with these bonuses is that it seems that no matter what, they spawn you back at the beginning or checkpoint, not the normal bonus exits. So that problem is made even worse and makes me want to do these bonuses even less. Regarding general gameplay, the one advantage this version has over the original is the aspect ratio of the GBA gives more horizontal screen space. There's slightly less vertical space, but that doesn't matter much with this game. It is nice having more room to breathe horizontally, but it's not that significant of a difference and it doesn't make up for all the other downgrades. All the same levels from the Super Nintendo version are here, and just those. There aren't any new levels. Not even Necky's Nutmare from the Game Boy Color made it over, which is no real loss anyway. Some levels have been rearranged weirdly, not sure why. The first couple of worlds are the same, they kept Minecart Carnage right where it was, not swapping it with Madness. But in Vine Valley, Temple Tempest was moved to the final level of the world, where it used to be right before Orangutan Gang. And in Gorilla Glacier, the first two levels are the same, but the rest have been rearranged. Ice Age Alley and Croctopus Chase have been swapped, so the latter comes first. And the same thing happened with Torchlight Trouble and Rope Bridge Rumble, with Torchlight now being the final level in the world. And the same pattern happens in Kremkrock, where Elevator Antics and Poison Pond were swapped, and the same with Minecart Madness and Blackout Basement. Chimp Caverns, though, is the same as Super Nintendo. I don't know why they swapped around these levels. They don't really change much. And in Kremkrock's case, I think it's worse that Blackout Basement isn't the last level there. I think that's a great end to the world. And it's weird to end Gorilla Glacier with Torchlight Trouble. I guess I understand wanting to end Vine Valley with Temple Tempest over Clam City, but that's the only one I can understand. Bonus stages are all the same, though the transitions when you enter them are slower, and they now have these splash screens showing what kind of bonus it is, like how Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 present them. They don't look as good as those though. Bonus stages still contribute to completion, but now there is an extra collectible added. You can find cameras, which will give you a photo you can view in the gallery. It's mostly just the promotional renders, but at much lower quality being on the GBA. There's some bigger pictures and new stuff as well, but honestly I don't care about these collectibles. The way you get them isn't just by finding them. There are ones like that, but then you have ones for rolling into a bunch of enemies or ground slapping an army, and as far as I know the game doesn't hint at how to get them, and I just don't care. I don't think this adds anything to the game. Some of these are also rewarded to you for beating the new minigames. So you now have the ability to save anywhere you want, as well as call Funky's plane from anywhere without visiting them. So both Candy and Funky are free to have minigames instead. Funky is just Funky's Fishing again. It's basically the same minigame, but faster, I guess. Wasn't that fun the first time, it's not anymore here. Candy has a dancing minigame where you hit the buttons or directions at the right time, and it sucks. I don't understand the timing for this. It feels like I'm hitting them at the right time, but it just doesn't work. I got a bit of the hang of it eventually, but even still, it felt really inconsistent and just bad to play. And also, it looks ugly. Seriously, look at this. I didn't even bother trying for these after the first couple. Even if it wasn't inconsistent, it's not exactly fun, and not what I come to Donkey Kong Country for. The bosses in this version actually got some touch-ups, and yeah, they needed that, but it's not really enough to actually improve them. Very Naughty is, damn, he's bigger, and every time you hit him, he does a big jump like really naughty in the original, but only one. Otherwise, this is the same fight, and the changes don't actually do much. Master Neki Jr. is the same, pretty much. He'll glow red when you're unable to hurt him, which I guess is helpful, but nothing else has changed. Queen Bee actually got completely overhauled. She starts out with a wavy pattern instead of going at you at a straight line, and after being hit, she summons a bunch of zingers around her in various patterns, which will extend her hitbox, making dodging her tougher, and you need to keep hitting them with barrels to be able to hit her. Damn, that's actually better. Not super hard, but much more interesting than before. Really naughty kinda got downgraded, actually. Instead of having that insane horizontal speed, he's the same as very naughty in this version, except the big jump causes easily avoidable stalactites to fall. He doesn't increase the amount of jumps he does for each hit, and isn't nearly as fast as the original version. Why did they do this? Dumb Drum is the same, except this time you throw a TNT barrel at it instead of it killing itself. This does not change the fight, except making it shorter, as you don't have to wait for it to slam down multiple times, you can just hit it. And Master Neki Sr. actually has both him and Junior tag teaming you. On paper that sounds interesting, but it's not really different at the start. The two nuts being shot is just as easy as one. But when one of them is defeated, the other acts like they did on Super Nintendo. For some reason I was having trouble dodging them here, where I had no issue on Super Nintendo. It doesn't look like the pattern was changed. I guess whatever small quirks with the way this version plays messes me up here. And K. Rool is the same. Fair enough, it was already a good fight. He also doesn't jump off screen, so you get hit if you try to jump with him again. If you die in the final phase, you get a checkpoint right here, which I don't think was necessary, but whatever. Man, this isn't a bad version of the game. For the most part, it is Donkey Kong Country. I just don't like any of the changes or additions here. The extra collectibles don't add much and are just more annoying. The minigames aren't very fun or are frustrating, and the presentation has been butchered. The sound design is much more annoying, the music is lower quality, the visuals are an eyesore, and the extra dialogue and cutscenes take away from the mood. In a way, I kinda respect the Game Boy Color version more, even if this is the better game, because that was at least ambitious in concept, and they tried to preserve the atmosphere as much as they could. Obviously, they couldn't, but it tries more so than this version. I just don't like it. Yeah, the little bit of extra screen space is nice, but that doesn't matter when everything else is worse. Gameplay is king, but the presentation, the atmosphere, is a huge part of Donkey Kong Country. While the game is just good on its own merits, the atmosphere is the defining thing about it. Again, this is not a bad version of Donkey Kong Country, but I think it's inferior in nearly every way, and I can't fathom as to why anyone would prefer this version other than if the extra screen space really matters that much to you. And I know some may think I'm being dramatic or taking this monkey game way too seriously. And yeah, sorry, I do take Donkey Kong Country seriously. Why is it bad to do so? Why is it bad to be attached to a game like this and not like how a different version of it was handled? Why would it be fine to give this much scrutiny to a more serious adult game? We hear a very pro-art of all kinds. And to say a game like Donkey Kong Country shouldn't be taken as seriously is very anti-art. If you care about a piece of art, you should be able to talk about it in any way you see fit. And that includes nitpicking a handheld port you think butchered a lot of the aspects you liked about the original. You came to this giant video about Donkey Kong Country willingly. You have no right to judge. All that to say, I'll be sticking with the Super Nintendo version. Well, for a video that's supposed to celebrate Donkey Kong Country's 30th birthday, it ended up being pretty negative. But that's what I get for including the handheld games. As much as I don't like the efforts to bring Donkey Kong Country to handhelds, and don't like the first DK Land, the original Donkey Kong Country holds a special place in my heart. It's a rough game. There are screen crunch issues, mediocre water levels, not enough unique level gimmicks, too many cave and mine levels, flawed bonus stage design, too many Animal Buddy bonus stages, and anticlimactic bosses. But all that is easily ignored because of the charm and personality of the game. The amazing atmosphere and presentation was one of a kind when it came out, and still is impressive. The characters, while shallow, mostly have great designs and personality to them. Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong are just cool, and I love playing as them. There's not much story, but I love coming up with my own theories for what's going on, and the game is genuinely fun and features many well-designed levels. Roll jumping is a great mechanic, and while the bonuses are flawed, there's a good sense of exploration. Donkey Kong Country is a game that I like more than it is good. It is a good game. It is a pretty solid platformer with fun mechanics and outstanding presentation and atmosphere, but it's got some rough edges. Some stuff just hasn't been quite figured out yet. I've given it a critical eye and haven't shied away from talking about the things it does poorly, which is quite a lot, but I still love this game to pieces. This is one of the games that got me into platformers and cemented it as my favorite genre, but it is very much a first game. The sequels, well, best save that for their own videos. I love Donkey Kong, especially Rare's vision of Donkey Kong, and that all started right here. It doesn't matter how flawed it is, it launched my favorite series, and is a pretty good game on top of that. For all of that, I will always love Donkey Kong Country. Happy birthday, Donkey Kong Country. And I guess happy birthday to me, as much as I don't want to acknowledge it. We're kindred spirits, after all. Growing up is scary, and I have a lot more to figure out, but at least I've got Donkey Kong by my side. And with that, I'll leave us off with the wise words of George Wood.
Donkey Kong Country is truly perfect. If you do not get this amazing new generation of Donkey Kong madness, you are stupid. Yes, I know, that's insulting, but it's also the truth.
Hey, thanks for watching. This might be a bit unexpected, and I'm pausing the Paper Mario stuff again for this, but don't worry, I'll get back to that soonish. This is the start of another big project of going through the Donkey Kong franchise. Still unsure if I will cover literally every game. A certain sub-series stands in my way a bit with that, but there's a lot of Donkey Kong in this channel's future. It's not going to be all at once. Right now the plan is to get through the DKC trilogy. What comes after is yet to be determined. I'll be making an update video pretty soon, which will go into more detail about this and other future plans, so look out for that. Not really much else to say here as I'm saving the updates for that video, so be sure to support me on Patreon if you can and feel like I've earned it. Link in the description. And now to shout out my patrons: Enemy, Kaiju, Neo, Friday, Matto Schmilmore, Jordan Laughlin, and Level 2 Janitor.